The light behind the bandage was blue, and then it was everything. Physician-adept Sarah's Vaughn lowered his upper pair of hands and told the human to keep still, though she had not moved. He had performed this uncovering 41 times on 41 species, and 41 times the patient flinched, wept, reached for a face they could not yet feel. The human did none of it. She lay flat on the recovery cradle with her scarred fingers folded on her stomach and her breathing slow, and when the last layer of the shielding wrap peeled away from her eyes, she did not gasp. She looked at the ceiling of his clinic, and then she looked at him, and something in the way she looked made the fine membrane along his throat tighten without his permission. "You will see color that has no name in your language," he said, because that was the line he always said. "Rest the optic nerve. Do not turn your head quickly." "There's a wire behind that panel," the human said. "The one over your left shoulder. It's carrying a current that runs when you talk." Sarah's did not turn his head quickly either. He had trained himself long ago never to confirm a guess by looking at the thing guessed. But his second pair of hands, the fine ones, went still on the instrument tray, and the human noticed that too, because her eyes tracked down to his lower hands and stayed there a moment before rising again. She was called Ren Sade, 22 standard years, a salvage diver off a human deep-hull crew that no longer existed. Her file said flare blindness, both eyes, progressive, untreatable by any clinic that would take a debt-marked human. Her file said desperate. Her file said grateful in advance. The clinic on Halber Reach took charity cases the way a tide takes driftwood, and Sarah's had chosen her from the tide with great care. And now she was looking at the wire behind his wall as if it had been drawn on the plaster in ink. "Rest your eyes," he said again. "They don't need rest." Ren sat up. The cradle chimed a warning and she ignored it. She swung her legs over the edge and set her bare feet on the cold floor and looked around the room slowly, methodically, the way a diver checks a flooded compartment before she trusts it. Sarah's watched her gaze move across surfaces. He had spent a small fortune to keep clean and featureless, and he watched her find things in them. "Your walls glow," she said. "Not the walls, something in the walls, lines of it. There's a grid running through the whole ceiling, thin, warm, like veins in a leaf." She lifted one hand and traced the air along a path only she could see. "It bends around that light fixture. It goes into the floor there, and it's brighter near the door." Sarah's kept his 4 hands folded and his face composed and let the horror arrive privately, in the space behind his sternum where his species kept the things it could not say. He had tuned the augment to a narrow window. He had been precise. He had meant to give her a sliver of the spectrum, a single band enough to be useful and no more, a keyhole through which she might peer at the world and depend on him to tell her what she was seeing. That had been the entire architecture of the plan. A blind human, given a keyhole, owned by the hand that made the key. But she was not describing a keyhole. She was describing the door thrown open. "How many colors?" he asked, and was careful to make it sound clinical. "Would you say you can distinguish now?" Ren looked at him. Bright orbital daylight came down through the dome overhead, hard and clean off the ice white of the planet below, and it fell across her ordinary face and her cropped brown hair and the old flare scar that seemed one temple. And in that plain light, she did not look like anything at all. She looked like a tired young woman who had been given her sight back and had not yet decided to be happy about it. "All of them," she said, "and a lot you don't have a word for. You were right about that part." The clinic hummed. Somewhere below the recovery suite a pump cycled, and Sarah's heard it and knew that she saw it, saw the current run to the pump and back, saw the whole hidden circulatory truth of the room he had built to hide such truths. He had planned to spend the next 19 days teaching her to see, drop by careful drop, so that every new thing she perceived would come from his hand and taste of his authority. 19 days of dependence, curated. He had lost all 19 in a single unwrapping. "Lie down," he said, "please." "You said please that time." Ren tilted her head. The first 2 times you didn't. Your throat does a thing when you're not sure. It's doing it now." She was reading his skin. Not his words, not his eyes, the membrane at his throat, the one that flushed and cooled with the movement of his blood, the one no member of any species he had ever treated could see well enough to interpret, because the flush lived in a band of the spectrum that alien eyes filtered out as noise. His own people could read it dimly, in the right light, at the right angle, and considered it a private organ, a thing a physician learned to master before he was allowed to hold a blade. Sarah's had spent 30 years mastering his throat. And a flare-blind human, off a dead salvage crew, had learned to read it in under a minute. He made himself breathe. He made the membrane still by an act of will he had not needed to perform since his examinations. "There is an adjustment period," he said. "You are perceiving artifacts, overflow. The nerve is inflamed and it is throwing false signal. Some of what you see is real and some of it is the wound. You cannot yet tell which is which. That is what I am here for, to teach you." It was a good lie. It was, in fact, a lie he had prepared weeks in advance for exactly this contingency, filed under the low probability that the augment overshot its window. He delivered it smoothly, in his warm physician's register, with his hands open and unthreatening. Wren watched his throat while he said it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The wire behind the panel is real. The grid in the ceiling is real. The current in the pump is real. And what your throat just did while you told me none of it was real, that was real too." She stood up off the cradle. The chime shrieked again, and she reached over without looking and put one scarred finger on the contact that silenced it, on the first try, because she had seen the current waiting behind it. "I've been reading pressure gauges in the dark since I was 14. You get so you don't need the number. You feel where the needle wants to go." She looked at him with those plain, remade eyes. "Your needle wants to go to the door too. You keep almost looking at it." Sarah's did not look at the door. Behind the door, 3 levels up, in a lease suite with the manifest scrubbed, a client was waiting for word that the asset had come online. The client had paid in advance, in hard transferable credit, for a human who could see the underlight. The client did not know that Sarah's had planned to keep the human keyhole blind and dependent and sell her services by the hour rather than sell her whole. The client believed it was buying a finished instrument. The client was not a patient creature. "You're afraid of whoever's up there," Wren said. "Not of me, of them." She was still working it out, still reading the flush and the stillness and the placement of his hands, assembling him the way she must once have assembled the shape of a wreck from the echoes coming back. "You made me to sell me, and now I can see too much, and you don't know if that makes me worth more or worth killing." The membrane at his throat betrayed him before he could stop it. "There it is," she said softly, not cruel, not triumphant. She said it the way a diver confirms a depth. "Worth killing, then. Or you're afraid I am." Sarah's Vaughn had opened the eyes of 41 patients and closed the eyes of a number he did not count, and in 3 decades no one on the recovery cradle had ever frightened him. He stood in the bright, clean daylight of his own clinic and understood, with the cold, total clarity of a diagnosis, that he had built exactly the wrong thing, and that it was now standing between him and the door, barefoot, unarmed, entirely calm, taking his pulse with its eyes. "Lie down," he said one more time, and heard how thin it had gotten. "No," said Wren. "I think I'll stand, and I think you'd better tell me who's upstairs and what they paid and how long I've got. Because you can lie to me now and I'll see it, or you can tell me the truth and save us both the time." She glanced up once at the grid of warm current threading the ceiling, following it to where it thickened and turned and ran off through the wall in the direction of the lift shaft. "And there's a lot of current moving up there, more than a waiting room needs, so I'd start soon." Below the dome the ice planet turned, throwing its hard white light up through the glass, and for the first time in his long and careful career, the physician found he had nothing prepared to say. She had come to Halber Reach on the last of her air. Wren remembered that part clearly. in the way you remember the edges of a thing and not its middle. The salvage tender Grendel's Mercy had been 31 days out from the human way station at courting when the star they were mining a dead cruiser beside had thrown a flare, unscheduled, the kind the survey charts swore that class of star did not throw. The radiation had come through the cruiser's ruined hull like light through a torn sail. Most of the crew had been shielded behind the tender's belly. Wren had been outside in the wreck 40 meters down a flooded corridor with a cutting torch, and she had seen the flash come and had shut her eyes, and it had not mattered that she shut them. It came through the lids. It came through the bone. When she opened them again, the world had a bright smear across the center of it that never went away, and over the following months the smear had grown until it ate everything, until she could tell day from night and nothing finer, until the crew of a dying ship voted with the quiet mercy of people who had no money to put her ashore at the nearest port that would take a debt-marked human without asking why. The nearest port had been Halber Reach, and the only clinic on Halber Reach that would touch a flare-blind human for free had been the old charity ward, run by a soft-voiced, four-armed physician who examined her eyes with instruments that hummed at the edge of hearing and told her gently that he could give them back. She had known it was too good. You did not dive for a living without learning that the salvage that comes to you easy is the salvage that's been left as bait. But she had been blind and 22, and she had shut her eyes against a star and lost. And when a soft voice offers to undo that, you do not have the strength to ask what it costs. She had let him take her eyes apart. She had trusted the tide. And now she stood barefoot on his cold floor and saw the whole room lit up with its secrets. And she understood, at last and too late and just in time, exactly what she had let him do. The augment had not given her back her eyes. It had given her different eyes. She could see the old spectrum, the ordinary one, the light every species swam in, but laid over it now, brighter than it, was a second world. Current in wires, heat in bodies, a cold blue crawl along the ceiling grid that she would later learn was the station's data spine, and on living things, a wash of color that moved, fast and hot where the surgeon lied, slow and even where he told the truth, pooling at his throat like blood under skin. He had made her to see one narrow band of it. She had woken seeing all of it. She did not yet know why, and she filed the question away, because a diver in a flooded compartment does not stop to wonder why the water is rising. She marks the exits and she watches the pressure and she keeps her breathing slow. There were 2 exits from the recovery suite, the main door where the current ran thick, and a service hatch behind a false cabinet on the far wall, where a thinner thread of power ran to a lock, a hatch he had not mentioned, because he had not meant for her to know it was there. She marked it. She kept her breathing slow. His name, Sarah said finally, is Surath Drail. He holds a factorship in the Marrow Court. He arrived on Halber Reach 4 days ago on a private hull with a scrubbed manifest, and he is waiting 3 levels up for me to confirm that you can see the underlight, at which point he will pay the balance and take possession of you. The underlight, Wren repeated. That is the human word you would reach for. There is no clean translation. It is the part of the spectrum that no eye in the settled galaxy can see. Sarah's had folded all 4 hands now, the physician's posture, but Wren could see the flush racing at his throat and knew the calm was a garment. Every species that ever built a ship evolved under a star, and every star bleeds this band, and every eye that ever grew learned to throw it away as glare. To see would be to be blinded by noise. So evolution shut the door in the Ole and the Marrow, in the Thren and the Kesset, and every people that ever looked up. The door is shut in all of them. The galaxy is, in this one respect, uniformly blind. He paused. And for 4,000 years, the powers that run it have used that blindness the way you would use a dark room. Wren looked at the grid on the ceiling, at the current in the walls, at the man in front of her, lit up like a lantern with his own fear. They hide things in it, she said. They hide everything in it, said Sarah's Valm, and I built you to see. He should not have told her. Sarah knew it as the words left him, felt the error the way a surgeon feels the slip of a blade a hair before the blood comes, too late to stop, in time only to regret. He had meant to manage her, to feed her a curated truth, keep her frightened and grateful and pointed at the client's use. Instead, he had stood in his own clinic and let a barefoot human take the whole shape of it out of him, piece by piece, because every evasion he reached for died in his throat where she could read it dying. That was the thing he had not planned for. A lie is a room with the lights off. He had spent his life in that room, comfortable, unseen. And she had walked in and turned the lights on, and now every lie he told stood in the middle of the floor with its shadow pointing straight at him. Why, Ren said, why build a human who can see it? What does Drael want to look at? That is his business, and I did not ask. Sarah's heard his own voice and heard, a half-beat later, the small hot flush the answer sent up his throat and saw her see it. You asked, Ren said. You just didn't like the answer, try again. Below them the pump cycled. Above them the current gathered in the lift shaft, and Sarah's, who could not see the current, who had never in his life seen it, who had built the very door he now stood locked outside of, understood that the human across from him could tell him things about his own clinic that he did not know. It was the most profound helplessness he had felt since childhood, and it arrived dressed as a girl of 22 rubbing the cold out of one bare foot against the other. The Marrow Court keeps a ledger, he said, quietly now. The performance had failed, he set it down. Not of money, of claims. Every inhabited system, every species, every world with a pulse on it carries a mark in the underlight, a tag. It says whose the thing is, whose it will be. There are systems out past the Kesset Rim that have never seen a marrow hull, and the beings on them live and farm and bury their dead and do not know that a mark hangs over their sky that says harvest and a date and a hand. The mark has been there for 200 years. They cannot see it. No one can see it. He looked at her. Drael wants a seer, not for me, not for one clinic. He wants to know who else can read the ledger. He wants to find the leaks. And he wants, I believe, though he did not say, to know whether the marks are still holding, out along the edges, in the dark rooms of the galaxy where the light was never supposed to come on. The clinic hummed. Ren stood very still, and for the first time since the bandage came off, something moved behind her plain, remade eyes that was not calculation. You said there are systems with a mark on them, she said. Whose? I told you, the Marrow's. No. Her voice did not rise. It went flatter and colder, and Sarah's felt the change the way you feel a pressure drop before a hull gives. You said inhabited systems, species with a pulse. You built me from a human off a human crew, and you sold me to a court that keeps a ledger of who to harvest. She was looking at him, but he had the sudden certainty she was seeing something past him, something in the band he had opened for her, some color she had learned to read in the last 10 minutes. Is there a mark over human space? Sarah's Vaughn, who had never seen the underlight and never would, did not have to see it to know the answer. He had read the Marrow's provisional registry. He had told himself it was old data, unconfirmed, none of his concern, the price of doing business with a court. The flush went up his throat before he could kill it. There it is, Ren said for the second time that day, in that same flat diver's voice. Don't bother. I can see it on you. She turned, unhurried, and looked at the false cabinet on the far wall, at the thin thread of current running to the hatch he had never mentioned, and then she looked up at the thick, bright river of power gathering in the lift shaft where a factor of the Marrow Court waited to take possession of her eyes. Now, she said, tell me about the hatch you didn't mention, and tell me fast, because that current upstairs just doubled and it's coming down. The hatch behind the false cabinet led to a maintenance crawl that ran the spine of the clinic level, and Sarah's opened it with a code he entered without looking, and the whole time he entered it Ren watched the thread of current jump under his lower fingers, and knew the code was real before the lock let go. You go first, she said. You know the turns. You can see the turns. He said it bitterly, and it was the first honest thing his voice had done since the bandage. You can see the wiring, you do not need me. I need you not to close this hatch on me from the other side." Ren stepped through after him into the dark. It was not dark to her. The crawl ran in a low, warm net of power lines and cooling loops, and the two of them moved through it in a wash of color she had no names for, the physician's 4 arms folding him small, her own scarred hands finding the rungs. "Also, I need you to tell me why they built the underlight into everything. The grid, the pump, the ceiling. If no one can see it, why hide the wiring in it?" "They do not hide the wiring in it." Sarah's voice came back low over his shoulder. "The wiring bleeds into it. Everything that carries power bleeds a little into the band, the way a hot pipe bleeds heat. To the marrow, to the ole, to every eye that ever grew, that bleed is invisible. It is the cheapest place in the universe to hide a signal, because the whole universe agreed 4 billion years ago not to look there." He stopped at a junction and she saw him orient by touch. The marrow did not build the underlight into the station. The station was always shouting into it. The marrow simply learned to listen, and then to speak. The crawl shivered. Somewhere behind and above them, a heavy door cycled, and Ren felt the vibration come down through the rungs into her palms. And in the band, she saw the current in the door's mechanism spike and fall. "They're in the recovery suite," she said. "The one we just left." Sarah's went still. "You can hear that?" "I can see the door you locked behind us drawing power. Somebody opened it from the other side." She moved up beside him in the crawl close, her voice dropping to almost nothing. "How many?" "I do not. Guess fast, you know his people. Drail travels with a pair of Thren, enforcers, chitin-plated, 2 of them always, he calls them his hands." The physician's throat worked in the dark, a small hot flush she read like print. "And he does not come himself unless he has decided the matter is closed." "Then he thinks the matter is closed." Ren looked back down the crawl the way they had come, at the warm net of the clinic thinning behind them, and forward, where the lines ran on toward the level's edge and the public concourse beyond. "Which means whatever he paid you, he's decided not to pay the rest of it. You built him an asset and now he's collecting it for free and cleaning up the person who built it. You said it yourself. Loose ends." "You are guessing," Sarah said, but the flush had already answered for him. "I don't guess." Ren started forward along the crawl, sure-footed on rungs she could see lit from within. "I read the needle. Come on, physician. You made the eyes. The least you can do is walk me out of the building before the people you sold them to peel them back off." They came out of the crawl into a service vestibule where the public concourse of Halber Reach opened up ahead in a blaze of orbital daylight, and Ren stopped at the mouth of it and looked, and for a moment the diver in her lost her footing. She had thought the clinic was full of hidden things. The concourse was drowning in them. It ran a 1/4 kilometer under a barrel of clear dome, the ice planet's hard white light pouring down through it onto a river of bodies. Ole and Thren and squat gray Kesset and tall-robed things she had no name for, thousands of them, moving between the market stalls and the transit gates and the tall glowing boards of the arrivals hall. In the ordinary spectrum it was a bright busy port under a bright cold sky. In the band, it was something else. Every living body carried its wash of color, truth slow and lie fast, so that the whole river of the crowd shimmered and pulsed with 1,000 small honesties and deceptions, and threaded through all of it, hanging in the air over stalls and gates and the shoulders of certain hurrying figures, were the marks. She saw them for what they were now that she was looking. Tags, sigils that hung in the underlight over things and beings, invisible to every eye in that crowd except hers. Over a crate of cargo being wheeled toward a transit gate hung a slow green glyph she would later learn meant bonded, dispute. Over a Kesset merchant arguing at a stall hung a small red mark that pulsed in time with his hearts. And over the wide double gate of the arrivals hall, high up where no one would ever think to paint anything because there was no one who could see the paint, hung a great pale sigil the size of a shuttle, cold and old and patient, and Ren looked at it and did not need a translation to feel what it meant. because it meant the same thing in every language that had ever been afraid. Mine. That mark, she said quietly, over the arrival's gate, the big one. Sarah's did not look up because he could not see it. Describe it. Pale, old, cold, it's got corners like a seal pressed in wax, it's hanging over the whole gate. The physician was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. That is a marrow claim seal. It marks the whole station. Halber Reach belongs to the court in the ledger, whatever the flag over the Port Authority says. Everyone here lives under a mark they cannot see and has done for a century. He drew his 4 arms in. You are the first being on this concourse who has ever looked up and known it was there. Wren stood in the pouring daylight and looked at the great cold seal hanging over 10,000 oblivious heads, and felt something settle in her that was not fear and was not anger. It was the flat cold clarity of a diver who has finally seen the whole shape of the wreck she is inside, how big it is, how deep, how far the swim back. She marked it. She kept her breathing slow. "All right," she said. "Which way to a hull off this station?" That was when the crowd, 40 meters ahead, parted around 2 tall chitin-plated shapes moving against the flow, and Wren saw the kill color come up on them before she saw their faces. The Thren moved like people who had been told exactly who they were looking for. Wren saw them before they saw her, and she saw the wrong thing about them before she saw anything else. In the band, a living body under stress ran hot and fast, its truth color scattering into the quick bright wash she had learned in 10 minutes meant fear, aggression, the readiness to act. Both Thren burned with it. But under the burn, low and cold and deliberate, each of them carried a second signature she had not seen on anyone else in the crowd. A tight coiled knot of current riding at the hip, banked and waiting, that flared a little brighter each time the enforcer's hand drifted near it. A weapon, powered, concealed, primed. She could not see the shape of it in the ordinary light. It was under a coat, a fold, a plate, but she could see the current it drew, sitting there patient at the hip like a held breath. "Both of them are carrying," she said. "Hip height, left side on the front one, right side on the back one. Charged and waiting. You cannot possibly." I can see the current in the cell. Wren was already stepping back, drawing the physician with her out of the mouth of the vestibule into the shadow of a shuttered stall where the crowd thinned. Concealed sidearms don't stop drawing power just because you hid them. They idle. They keep the cell warm so the shot's ready. It's the brightest thing on both of them except their faces. She watched the Thren come. They're sweeping the crowd. They don't have my face yet or they'd be running. Which means Drayle gave them a description and not a picture. Small, human, recent surgery. There are no other humans on Halber Reach. Sarah's voice had gone thin again. I noticed. Wren's eyes moved fast, cataloging exits the way she had once cataloged them at the bottom of a flooded hull. 2 transit gates left, a cargo lift current-heavy, freight-only, a maintenance stair, and behind all of it, threaded through everything, the warm net of the station's power that only she could see, a map of the place laid over the place, showing her every door before she reached it. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out into that crowd, alone, upright, toward the transit gates, like a physician with somewhere to be. They will recognize me. Yes, that's the point. Wren's voice did not change. They're looking for a small human and a 4-armed physician together, so we won't be together. You'll be the 4-armed physician alone, and they'll come to you, and they'll ask you where I am, and you'll tell them I ran for the freight lift. She nodded at the cargo elevator across the concourse, the one running heavy with current. And while they're watching the wrong door, I'll be behind them. Sarah stared at her with all the stillness his species had. And then what? And then I decide what to do about 2 people with charged sidearms who were sent to peel my eyes out. She said it without heat, the way she might have called a depth or a pressure. You built me to see, physician. Let me see. You are one small human, they are Thren. You have no weapon and no armor and you cannot fight them. I'm not going to fight them. Wren was already moving, sliding along the shuttered stall front into the deeper shadow behind it, her bare feet silent on the cold deck. "I'm going to let the room do it. Walk. Now, before they pick your throat out of the crowd, because I promise you they can't read it, but I can, and right now it's screaming." He walked. ScienceFiction stepped out of the shadow of the vestibule into the pouring daylight of the concourse, and made himself a physician with somewhere to be. 4 arms folded, gait unhurried, and he felt the human vanish behind him the way a light goes out. And he understood as he walked that he had, in the space of 1 afternoon, gone from owning her to obeying her, and that the change had happened so smoothly he had not felt the hinge turn. He found the Thren because they found him. They came out of the crowd on either side of him, tall and plated and quiet, and the nearer one, the one Wren had said carried on the left hip, and Sarah's discovered he now believed her completely, leaned its blunt head down toward him and spoke in the flat clicking trade the enforcers favored. "Physician. The factor's asset where?" "She woke seeing," Sarah said, and heard how steady he kept it and thought, "She cannot see my throat now, so let it flush, let it do whatever it wants. There is no one here to read it." The freedom of that was obscene. He had not lied to an unreadable audience in half a day, and it felt like taking off a boot that was too tight. She woke seeing and she panicked. She struck the attending and ran. "I have alerted no one because the factor asked for discretion." He let his lower hands tremble a little the way a frightened physician's hands would. "She went for the freight lift, the large one. I could not stop her. She is stronger than she looks." The Thren on the left turned its head toward the cargo elevator across the concourse, where the heavy current ran, where a small human might plausibly have fled toward the docks. Sarah's did not know that the current ran heavy there. He only knew that Wren had told him to send them to the freight lift, and that everything Wren had told him in the last hour had been true, and so he pointed the enforcers at the freight lift and trusted, for the first time in his life, in a thing he could not see. "Stay," the Thren told him, and both of them moved off through the crowd toward the freight lift, fast now, hands drifting to their hips, and Sarah stood in the daylight and watched them go and felt the cold sweat of collaboration prickle along the membrane of his throat, and thought, with a clarity that frightened him, "I have just followed the orders of the thing I built to follow mine." Behind the Thren, unseen, a small barefoot human peeled out of the shadow of a shuttered stall and fell into their wake, matching their pace, staying in the blind arc behind their broad plated backs, close enough to touch, watching the charged knots of current ride at their hips. Wren followed the enforcers across the concourse and did the arithmetic while she walked. She could not fight 2 Thren. Sarah's had been right about that, and she'd known it before he said it. She had no weapon. She was small and unarmored, and 11 hours out of surgery, and her legs were not entirely sure they belonged to her yet. In the ordinary spectrum, she was exactly what she looked like, an outmatched young woman trailing 2 professional killers across a crowded port. But the ordinary spectrum was only half the room now. She could see the charge in their sidearms. She could see the current in every door on the concourse, which ones were locked, which ones idled ready to open, which ones drew the heavy load of a freight system. She could see the station's whole nervous system laid over the station, and she could see, riding on the 2 Thren, the tell she had been waiting for. As they closed on the freight lift, the coiled knots of current at their hips flared and settled, the cells topping themselves off, getting ready. They meant to draw the moment they had a target. They were not going to ask her twice. Which meant the freight lift was going to be a kill box, and she was walking 2 killers into it, and she needed to be somewhere else when the doors closed. She found the somewhere else in the band. Off to the left of the freight lift, half hidden behind a stack of bonded cargo, ran a maintenance stair, a thin thread of emergency current, a door that idled unlocked because fire code across 4,000 years of settled space had never once let a species bolt its stairwells. She marked it, 12 meters. She kept her breathing slow. The lead Thren reached the freight lift and slapped the call plate, and the great doors began to grind open on an empty car, and both enforcers stepped forward to the threshold, hands going to their hips, heads turning to sweep the interior for a cornered human. And Ren, 12 meters back and to the left, stopped following them, turned and walked without hurry toward the maintenance stair, and was 3 steps from it when the thing she had not planned for came around the cargo stack and put a charged sidearm in her face. There had been a third Thren. He was bigger than the other two, plated in the same blue-black chitin, and he had come around the cargo stack low and quiet from a blind angle. Even the band had not shown her until he was already there, because he had been standing behind a bonded freight container whose dense mass drank the underlight the way deep water drinks light. The muzzle of his sidearm was a hand's width from her face. In the ordinary spectrum, it was a matte gray tube in a 4-fingered fist. In the band it was a small furious sun. The cell behind it charged bright and hot, and Ren looked at the charge, and not the muzzle, and the diver in her found her footing again. "You're the third one," she said. "They didn't tell you to sweep. They told you to stand still and wait for me to walk into it." Smart, her voice was flat and even, a pressure reading, a depth. "You can put that down. Your factor crossed 3 systems for the thing in my head. He doesn't get it if you cook it." The Thren's mouthparts moved. "Charge is set to hold," it clicked. "Not to burn, you will sleep. You will waken the factor's hull." "No," Ren looked at the little son of the cell. She had seen the other 2 Thren top their charges off at the freight lift, and she had seen the level they charged to, and this one was charged to the same. "It's set to burn, same as the 2 you sent to the lift. He told all 3 of you to bring me back cooked, and he told you to say hold so you'd stand closer." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. "Which means the alive order was the lie and the burn order was the truth. And when I'm Ash and the physician's Ash, he's got 2 witnesses left. You and your friends. How long do you think that lasts?" She watched it land. Not on his face. Thren faces did not move the way faces moved, but in the band, where a slow, cold doubt crawled up through the enforcer's burning signature like silt stirred off a wreck floor. He did not lower the weapon, but the charge behind it did not fire, and the muzzle drifted, half a degree, while some part of the killer behind it turned to look at a thing it had not been given permission to see. "You lie," it clicked. "I can't," Ren said. "That's the whole problem. Ask your factor why he needed a human who can't." And then, because she had seen the current gather in his leg servos a half beat before his weight shifted, because the exoframe of his armor lit up in the band every time it fed power to a joint, and it had just fed power to the joint that would carry him forward to take her, she moved first. She did not move at him. She had no chance against him, and she knew it. She moved to the side 1 step, the exact step his own reaching arm would try to correct into, and she took his gauntleted hand as it came, and she did not pull it toward her. She pushed it down, and left, onto the deck plate she had been standing next to since the moment he rounded the stack. A shrouded gray square set flush in the floor, unremarkable to any eye in the settled galaxy, blazing in the band with the fat idle current of a freight loader charging plate, live, waiting for a machine to set its foot on it and drink. The Thren's exo-armor set its hand on it instead. The current she could see, and he could not, went up through the gauntlet and found the suit's own power frame, and did what current does when it is given a circle to run. It ran. Blue fire she alone had seen an instant before it arrived jumped the seams of his armor in a single hard convulsion, and the enforcer went rigid, and then down all at once, the sidearm skittering from a hand that had stopped taking orders. He did not burn. There was no gore, no spectacle, only a big armored body folding onto the deck of a bright concourse and a smell like a scorched contact, and the small ozone crackle of a circuit finding ground. Ren stood over him with her heart going hard and her legs suddenly, distantly, not entirely hers. 11 hours out of surgery, the edges of the world tried to gray and swim, and she put a scarred hand on the cargo stack and breathed, slow, slow. The way you breathe when your air is low and panic is the thing that kills you. The band swam and steadied. The The enforcer's signature had gone from a furious sun to a dim banked ember, alive, stunned. His own suit's charge dumped through him. She had not killed him. She noted the fact without feeling much about it either way. She had kneaded him down, and he was down. She picked up the fallen sidearm, because a diver does not leave a tool on the floor, and she saw the charge still bright in it, and she turned toward the maintenance stair. The other two Thren were coming back from the freight lift at a dead run. They had found the car empty, and they had heard the crack of the charging plate, and they came around the cargo stack fast and low with their weapons already out. And Ren had a stunned enforcer at her feet, and a stolen sidearm in a hand that did not entirely belong to her and no time at all. And in the ordinary spectrum, she was a small swaying human about to be shot twice. But the band showed her the freight lift behind them, doors still open on the empty car, drawing its heavy idle load. And it showed her the great mag clamp above the cargo stack, the one that held the bonded containers stacked 4 high, a fat coil of current holding 100 tons of freight against the deck. And it showed her the release contact for that clamp, a live stud at the base of the stack, a hand's reach from where she stood, glowing with the small ready current of a thing that wants only to be touched. She touched it. The mag clamp let go, and 100 tons of bonded freight came off its stack in the half-second the two Thren spent rounding it, and the concourse filled with the grind and slam of falling containers, and the enforcers broke sideways to keep from being crushed, and Ren went the other way, into the maintenance stair, through the door that idled unlocked because 4,000 years of settled space had never once let a species bolt its stairwells, and was 3 flights down before the dust in the band had settled. She did not run far. She ran until the stair gave onto a mid-level service corridor, and then she stopped and put her back to the wall and let her legs shake themselves out while she watched, through the walls in the band, the current of the concourse above her seethe and reorganize around the thing she had done. She had a stolen sidearm and a stunned enforcer and 2 live ones and no idea where the physician was. She checked the charge and the weapon. She checked the exits. She kept her breathing slow. Sarah's found her 40 minutes later, and the finding cost him more than he expected. He had stood on the concourse while the freight came down, a physician frozen in a crowd of screaming Ol and clicking Thren and squat gray Kesset stampeding for the gates, and he had understood from the sound and the chaos that the human had not been taken, and he had felt. He examined the feeling later in the corridor with a physician's cold honesty, and did not like what he found, relief. He had built her to sell. He had followed her orders across a concourse. And when the freight came down and the crowd broke and he could not see her anywhere, the thing that moved in the space behind his sternum was not the loss of an asset. It was fear for a patient. He found her by doing the thing she would have done. He thought about where the current ran. He could not see it. But he knew the station's plans. And he knew that a diver who had just learned to see power would go where the power was thin and the exits were many. And he went down, into the mid-levels, into the service corridors. And he found her with her back to a wall and a Thren sidearm in her hand and her eyes closed. Her eyes were closed. That stopped him more than the weapon. "You are resting the optic nerve," he said, from 10 meters off, so she would hear him coming and not shoot. "I'm resting it because you told me to and because it turns out you weren't lying about that part." Ren opened her eyes. In the band her signature was low and even and gray with exhaustion. "Everything's brighter with them shut. Did you know that? I can see the current through my own eyelids. Through the wall behind me. There's a coolant loop running the length of this corridor and a data spine over the ceiling, and about 400 meters that way there's a hull lock drawing standby power." She looked at him. "You came to find me." "I came to find my instrument," Sarah said, and heard the flush go up his throat and remembered too late that she could see it. "No," Ren said without heat. "You didn't, but it's a nice thing to say." She pushed off the wall. Her legs held her. "Drail's cleaning up. He sent 3 enforcers to burn me and burn you, which means he's writing us both off, which means the sale's over and now it's just a mess he wants gone. You're a loose end same as me. You understand that? I understand it. Sarah's had understood it on the concourse, watching the freight come down. He had built a life on the certainty that he sat above the transaction, the physician, the maker of the thing being sold, untouchable. He had discovered in the space of one afternoon that to the Marrow court he was inventory. I understand it better than you. I have done business with the court for 11 years. I told myself I was a partner. I was a supplier. A supplier is a thing you replace. Then we want the same thing. Wren checked the charge in the sidearm again, an old diver's habit, confirmed the gauge, always confirm the gauge. Off this station on a hull before Drail's people seal the docks, you know the station. I can see what's charged and what's watched and what's waiting. Between us that's a way out. She looked at him with those plain, remade eyes. But I want the ledger. Sarah's went still. What? The Marrow's ledger. The one you told me about, the claims, the marks. Her voice did not change, but something under it did, went cold and flat and certain, the diver who has seen the whole shape of the wreck and decided to bring something up from it. You said there's a mark over human space. Harvest, a date, a hand. I want to see it. I want to know the date. And then I want it where people can see it, my people, who can't, because nobody can, because the whole galaxy agreed 4 billion years ago not to look. She stepped past him toward the thin, bright thread of the hull lock she could see 400 meters down the corridor. You built the eyes, physician. You don't get to be surprised they looked. They did not go to the docks. Sarah's explained it in the service corridor quickly, with the hull lock still bright and distant in Wren's band sight. And as he explained it, he watched her understand faster than he could speak, which he was learning to expect and had not yet learned to like. You want the ledger, he said. The ledger is not a document, it is not a file you steal off a spine. The claims live in the underlight, written into the station itself, refreshed from a node, a Marrow node. Drail did not come to Halber Reach only for you. He came because Halber Reach is a node, one of a few hundred across the settled galaxy, and the marks decay, and every so often a factor of the court must come in person and write them fresh. He drew his lower arms in, the physician's flinch. That is what he is doing 3 levels up, in the crown of the station under the dome. He is refreshing the claims, and he wanted a human who could see the underlight standing beside him while he did it, to confirm the marks took, because until this afternoon, no factor in 4,000 years has ever been able to see his own work. They write blind. They have always written blind. They press the seal and trust it holds. Wren stood with her back to the wall and the stolen sidearm loose in her hand and looked at nothing. And Sarah's understood she was looking at everything, at the whole lit map of the station laid over the station, following the current up. So the ledger's in the dome, she said, and Drail's in the dome, and the mark over my people gets rewritten in the dome today by him by hand. She pushed off the wall. Then that's where I'm going. That is where he will be strongest. Sarah's heard the alarm in his own voice and did not try to hide it, because hiding it was pointless now. He will have both surviving Thren and his personal retinue and the node's own defenses. You cannot walk into the crown of the station, and I'm not going to walk in. Wren was already moving back toward the stair up. I'm going to walk in seeing. You keep saying that like it's the same as walking in blind. It isn't. He writes blind. His guards fight blind. Every locked door and hot panel and charged weapon in that dome is going to be a lit sign to me and a dark room to them. She glanced back at him. You built the one thing in the galaxy that isn't blind, physician, and then you were surprised it wanted to look at the ledger. Come on, I need you to know the turns I can't see coming, and I need you to tell me one thing about the node before we get there. What thing? You said the factor writes the marks fresh, by hand. With instruments. Wren went up the stair, fast now. Her exhaustion burned off into the cold forward pressure Sarah's was beginning to recognize as the thing that made her dangerous. That means the node's got a console, a place where a hand touches the ledger. Show me that, and I'll show you what a diver does to a thing she can finally see. The crown of Halber Reach was a single great chamber under a dome of clear alloy, and the ice planet hung enormous and white beneath it, throwing its hard, cold daylight up through the floor so that the whole room stood in a wash of brilliant, reflected light. And Drayle was in the center of it with his instruments and his court, writing the ownership of 100 worlds into a band of the spectrum that no one in the room but a barefoot human could see. Sarahs came up the last of the service risers behind Wren and looked at the chamber through the grill of a maintenance vent and felt the old vertigo of the court, the certainty and the scale of it. High-factor Surith Drayle stood tall and slate-purple and robed, 4 attending scribes around him, the 2 surviving Thren at the chamber's edge, and a cephalopod adjutant the mottled gray of old stone hovering at his elbow with a rack of the court's instruments, the long pale rods that Sarahs had seen once before and never forgotten, the seal writers, the tools that pressed a claim into the underlight. Drayle held one now. He raised it toward the dome, toward the great cold sigil Wren had described hanging over the arrival's gate, and he moved it in a slow, deliberate figure, refreshing a seal he could not see, trusting 4,000 years of blind precedent that it would hold. "He's writing," Wren breathed at the vent grill beside him. Her voice had gone very flat. "I can see it. The seal over the station, it was fading at one corner. He's inking it back in. It's like watching a man repaint a line he can't see going over and over the last place he remembers it being." She was silent a moment. "There's more than the one. The whole dome's full of them, small ones, hundreds. Hanging in the air over the thing in the middle." The thing in the middle was the node, a low, broad plinth of dark alloy under the dome's apex, and above it, invisible to every eye in the chamber except one, hung the ledger of the Marrow Court, the claims, the marks, the seals over a quarter of the settled galaxy, refreshed here in this room by factors who had never once seen what they wrote. "The console you wanted," Sarahs murmured. "The plinth." He touches it to open the ledger. The instruments read from it and write to it, but it is keyed to the court. Blood and rank and a cipher pressed in the underlight. You cannot open it. Even I cannot open it, and I have stood beside it. I don't want to open it. Wren's eyes moved across the chamber, cataloging, and Sarahs watched her do it and thought of a diver counting exits at the bottom of a flooded hull. "I want to read it, and it's already open. He's got it open right now to write. It's hanging there in the light. All I have to do is get close enough to look." She shifted at the grill. "Tell me about the 2 Thren, the charges." Sarahs could not see the charges, but he had learned in one afternoon to answer her as if the answer mattered. "They will be armed as the others were. Court enforcers do not stand down inside a node." "They're charged to burn," Wren confirmed, watching them across the chamber through the grill, reading the little furious suns at their hips. "Same as the concourse. And the adjutant, the gray one with the instrument rack, he's got something at his back I can't read the shape of, but it's drawing a lot of current, more than a scribe needs." She filed it. "And Drayle," her voice changed. "Drayle's carrying 2, under the robe, chest height right side, small, charged low, not like the Thren, not a burn weapon, something else. Something that doesn't need much power to do what it does." Sarahs felt the membrane at his throat go cold. "A silence lance," he said. "The court factors carry them. It is not a weapon of war. It is a weapon of tidiness. It stops a heart from across a room and leaves no mark. He carries it for exactly one purpose, to end a conversation that has become inconvenient without raising his voice. He's got it charged and ready under his robe while he writes." Wren watched the high factor move his pale rod through the slow figure of the seal. "That's not a man refreshing the marks. That's a man who's already decided how the afternoon ends." She looked at Sarahs. "He knows we might come. He's expecting a mess. He's dressed for it." "Then we do not go in." Sarahs heard himself say it and knew it was the physician talking, the maker of careful plans, the being who had spent 30 years never entering a room he had not already mapped. "We go to the docks. We take a hull. The ledger has hung there for 200 years. It will hang there when we are gone. This is not the day to." "It's exactly the day." Wren said it without heat, which was somehow worse than heat. The mark over my people has a date on it, physician. I can see it from here. It's small and it's cold and it's got a number in it, and I've been reading gauges long enough to know a countdown when I see one. I'm not swimming past this wreck to catch a hull. I came up here to read that date, and I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to make sure it's the last thing that was ever written in a room where nobody but the writer could see the ink. She checked the sidearm's charge. Confirm the gauge. Always confirm the gauge. You can stay in the vent. You've done the hard part. You told me the turns. She did not wait for him to answer. She put her scarred hand on the grill, found the latch by the current that fed it, and let herself down into the crown of the station, into the brilliant reflected daylight of the ice planet, into the one room in the settled galaxy where the ledger hung open. And Sarah's, crouched in the vent, watched the small barefoot human walk out under the dome toward the high factor of the marrow court, and found that he had come out of the vent behind her before he had decided to. Because a physician does not leave a patient to bleed alone, even when the patient walked into the wound on purpose. The room saw her before Drayle did. A scribe made a sound. The two Thren came off the chamber's edge with their weapons rising. The gray adjutant turned, its instrument rack clutched to its mantle, and the thing at its back, the thing Wren could not read the shape of, brightened in the band as it woke. And high factor Surith Drayle lowered his pale rod from the seal he had been refreshing, turned, and looked at the small human standing barefoot on the daylit floor of his node, and did not reach for the weapon under his robe, because the high factor of the marrow court did not fear a single unarmed human, and because he was, above all things, curious. The physician's asset, Drayle said. His voice was low and smooth and came from somewhere deep in the slate-purple column of him. Walking, speaking, armed even. And here, of all the places it might have run, he set the seal writer down on the plinth with great care. You see it then, the band. You see what I am doing. I see it, Wren said. Describe it. The same command the physician had given her in the recovery suite a lifetime ago that morning. The whole court leaned toward her answer, because in 4,000 years no factor had ever heard his own work described. Describe what I have written. Prove you are what he sold me, and perhaps this afternoon goes differently than you fear. Wren looked up into the dome, at the great cold seal over the station, at the hundreds of smaller marks hanging in the air over the node, at the ledger of a quarter of the galaxy written in a light only she could see. She was quiet for a moment. Then she began to read. Seal over the station is fading at the lower corner, Wren said. You've been going over it. The corner's brighter than the rest now, wet-looking where you just re-inked it. The rest is old. 200 years old, you said. It's the color of there's no word. Cold, patient. It says the same thing in every language anyone was ever afraid in. She lifted her chin toward the node. Over the plinth there are 311 smaller marks. I can count them. Some are bright and new. Most are old. They're arranged in rings, sort of like a chart. The bright ones near the middle, the faded ones out at the edge where you haven't been in a while. She looked at Drayle. The edges are where you're losing them. You know that. That's half of why you're here. You're not just refreshing. You're checking which ones have gone dark on you in the dark. The chamber had gone very still. The four scribes had stopped moving. The gray adjutant's mantle had furled tight, and high-factor Drayle stood over his node and looked at the human who had just told him a thing about his own work that he had suspected for a decade and never once been able to confirm, and something crossed the slate purple of his face that Sarah's, watching from the shadow of the vent, had never seen on a factor of the court. It was hunger. Yes, Drayle breathed. Yes, the edges. We lose them at the edges. The instruments cannot read decay, only write, and so we ride out to the rim on rumor and old records, and we press the seal again into the dark, and we pray, we who pray to nothing, that it took, and you can see it. He came forward a step, the pale rod forgotten, the whole architecture of his purpose reorganizing around her in real time. You are not an asset. You are an eye, the first eye. Do you understand what the court would build around one working eye? We would put you in a chair above this node and you would tell us, for the first time in 4,000 years, what we have actually written. Every factor since the founding has worked in the dark, and you, a debt-marked human off a dead salvage hull, you could turn the light on. I know what you'd build, Ren said. I saw the chair on the way in. It's already here. She nodded without looking at a low framework of restraint set into the floor beside the plinth, a thing Sarah's had taken for part of the node's machinery and now, sickeningly, recognized. You didn't decide to build it just now. You brought it. You paid the physician for an asset and you brought the chair to bolt it into. The only thing you hadn't decided was whether to bolt me in or burn me, and you told all 3 of your enforcers to burn me, which means you decided burn right up until I walked in here and described your own ledger back to you. Now you're deciding again. Her voice did not change. You're a man who changes his mind based on what a thing is worth. I've met a lot of men like you at the bottom of wrecks. You're the ones who left the bait. Careful, Drayle said softly. I read the seal over the station, Ren went on, as if he had not spoken. You wanted proof. Here's proof. Halber Reach belongs to the court, harvest here deferred, held for transit value, refreshed on a 60-year cycle. And you're 2 years early because the lower corner started going and somebody on the rim reported a node dark and it made you nervous. She was reading it off the air as she spoke, and the whole court heard the impossible fluency of it, a human reading their most secret hand like a manifest. You want more proof. There's a mark over the Kesset systems, 3 of them yield tier dated. There's a mark over the Thren homeworld. Did your enforcers know that? That their own world hangs in your ledger with a claim on it. One of the Thren at the chamber's edge shifted, its weapon dipping half a degree. There's a mark over the old medical concordance, held in lien against a debt the court called in 90 years ago. Your physician's people belong to you too. He didn't know that either. In the vent, Sarah's went cold. Ren's eyes moved out along the ledger, ring by ring, toward the faded edge of it, and something in her face changed, the diver's calm going stiff at the corners, the way it had gone stiff when she first read the marks on the concourse. And there, she said, quieter, out at the edge, there's a mark that isn't like the others. It's not cold and waiting. It's done, closed off. Dark all the way through, like a light that's been switched off with a little sigil under it that means the same as the seal but finished. Completed. She looked at Drayle. There's a system in your ledger marked completed, harvest done, and the claim over it isn't waiting for a date anymore because the date already came. The dome was silent. How many of those are there, out at the edges where nobody could see? How many worlds have you already switched off in a light nobody could read, and buried the number in a ledger you were sure would stay dark? Drayle said nothing. He did not have to. Ren was reading his throat, or the slate-purple equivalent of it, the small hot flush of a being caught with the answer, and she saw it, and the whole court saw her see it. More than one, she said, flat, cold, a depth. You've done this before. This is not a plan, it's a practice. She let it hang in the daylight a moment, then went on because she had come up here to read the ledger and she was going to read the part that mattered most. And there's a mark, Ren said, and here her flat voice went flatter still, went down to the cold, even register of a diver reading the last gauge before the swim back. Over human space. Small. You filed us small. Yield tier, low resistance, deferred harvest, and a date. Read the date, Drayle said. He had gone very quiet. The hunger was still on him, but under it now was something more careful, because the human was reading true, every word of it true, and a factor who has spent his life writing in the dark does not take lightly the arrival of a witness who can see. 41 years, Ren said. That's the date on my people. 41 years, low resistance, deferred. You looked at a species that came up off a world your instruments can't even read, a world your surveys came back from calling the light noise and the biology noise and the whole planet a smear you couldn't focus, and you filed us low resistance. She let that sit. You couldn't see us. Your machines came to look at where we're from and they couldn't focus on it, so you wrote down the number that meant harmless, because that's the number you write when you can't see the thing. And then you built a chair to bolt one of us into so we could see for you. She looked up at him. You never once thought about what it would mean, that the one species in the galaxy your ledger couldn't focus on is the one species you could teach to read the ledger. Low resistance, Drayle repeated, and for the first time a thread of doubt moved through the slate-purple certainty of him. You dropped one of my enforcers on the concourse and brought 100 tons of freight down on the other 2 and walked up 3 levels through a sealed node. Alone. Barefoot. He looked at her, and Sarah's, watching, saw the exact moment the factor began to recalculate the number he had filed. Perhaps the survey was imprecise. It wasn't imprecise, Wren said. It was blind. Same as you. Same as this whole room. That's the thing you've all been so comfortable about for 4,000 years, that everyone's blind together, so nobody's blind, so you can write whatever you want on the dark and call it true because who's going to check? She took a step toward the node, toward the ledger hanging open in the light, and the 2 Thren brought their weapons up, and the gray adjutant's back-mounted thing flared bright in her band, and Drayle lifted one slate-purple hand to hold them all still, because he was not finished being curious. And now someone can check, Wren said. That's all I am. I'm the part you didn't survey. I'm the check on the ledger. She looked around the Dalit dome at the Thren who did not know their homeworld was claimed, at the gray adjutant, at the scribes, at the high factor with a silence lance charged under his robe. You want to know the funny part? You all think the danger in this room is me, the small human, the eye you want to bolt into a chair. She shook her head slowly. It's not me. I just see it. The danger in this room is what your factor's already written about the rest of you, and none of you can read it, but I can. And I think, before this goes the way he's decided it's going to go, you should all hear what he's got hanging over your own heads. Enough, said Drayle, and his hand moved toward his robe. Your adjutant, Wren said, fast and flat, before his hand reached the robe, the gray one with the rack. There's a mark on him. Not over him, on him, riding his mantle, small, tight, fresh. You wrote it this morning. I've been watching it since I came in and wondering what it meant, and I just worked it out because it's the same mark you've got over the physician and the same one you had over me. Surplus, terminate on completion. She did not look at the adjutant. She kept her eyes on Drayle. The thing on his back, the weapon he's carrying for you, that was never only for me. It was for the cleanup after. He's holding the tool you're going to use to tidy him. He just doesn't know it, because he can't see it. Only I can. The gray adjutant made a sound Sarah's had never heard a Merrill adjutant make. And the Thren, Wren went on, relentless, cold, reading the air as fast as she could speak. I told you your homeworld's in the ledger, claimed, yield tier. But there's more than that, and I didn't want to say it in front of you until I was sure, and now I'm sure. There's a mark on each of you. Same as the adjutant, same as the physician, same as me. Terminate on completion. One of the Thren turned its blunt head toward its own hip, uselessly, at a mark it would never see. You came to Halber Reach to burn one human and clean up a physician, and your factor wrote you into the same list, because that's what the list is. Everyone who touched the eye. Everyone who knows the ledger can be read. He's not closing a sale. He's closing a room. And every single being in it except him is on the wrong side of the line. She is manipulating you, Drayle said, and his voice was still smooth, still low, but Sarah's heard the effort in it now, the first crack in 4,000 years of writing on the dark. She sees nothing. She is a debt-marked human reciting fears. Look at her. Barefoot, alone, she cannot even. The lower corner of the seal over the station was fading, and you were 2 years early, Wren said. The Kesset systems, the Thren homeworld, the old Leon. My people 41 years, low resistance. I read your whole hand back to you and you called it proof, and now that it's pointed at your own people you're calling it a lie. She let the silence do the arithmetic for the room. You already told them I was right. You can't untell them. That's the trouble with a witness. Once you admit she can see, you can't pick which true things she's allowed to say. For a long moment, nothing in the Dalit dome moved. Then high-factor Surith Drayle reached into his robe and drew the silence lance, and it came up smooth and slim and pale, a rod no longer than a forearm, and there was no report and no muzzle flash and no sound at all, because the silence lance did not work in the light that everyone could see. It worked in the other one. It reached out along a thread of the underlight, a fine straight killing line that had never once been dodged in the long history of the court, because no eye that ever grew could see it coming, and it locked on the small human standing barefoot before the node, and it fired. Wren was already moving. She had seen the lance charge under the robe when she first came into the room. She had seen it draw its low, patient current, seen the thread of it wake as Drael's hand closed, seen the killing line reach out and find her chest. For the first time in 4,000 years, someone in the room could see the silence lance take aim, and in the half-beat between the lock and the fire, she did the one thing no target of a silence lance had ever done. She stepped out of the line. She did not throw herself. She did not dive. She took one short step to the left, unhurried, exact, the way a diver steps out of the path of a swinging spar she has watched begin to fall, and the fine invisible killing line passed through the space where her heart had been and went on, straight and true and blind, into the chest of the gray adjutant standing behind her with the quartz instruments clutched to its mantle. The adjutant's heart stopped. It folded down over its rack of pale rods without a sound, exactly the clean and markless death the lance was built to give, and it was dead on the daylit floor before Drael understood that he had missed, that he had fired the one weapon in the galaxy that could not miss, at the one target in the galaxy that could see it come, and that the tidy, invisible killing line he had loosed had spent itself on his own marked adjutant, in front of both his enforcers, in the full hard daylight of the node. The Thren had watched their factor draw a weapon they could not see and kill a member of his own court with it, while a human stepped calmly aside. He aimed at the human. One of them clicked, very quietly, into the ringing silence of the dome. The line went through her, into the adjutant. There was a weapon. There was a weapon we could not see. There has always been a weapon you could not see, Wren said. She had not raised her voice once. She stood a step to the left of where she had been, barefoot on the bright floor, the stolen sidearm still hanging loose and unfired in her hand, and she looked at the two enforcers with those plain, remade eyes. That's what I've been trying to tell you. He's been carrying it the whole time. He carries it into every room. He carried it in here to use on me and then on you. The only difference between the adjutant and the two of you is the order he does it in. She glanced once at the pale rod in Drael's hand, at the low charge already building in it again as it readied a second line. It's charging again. He's going to try once more, and this time he knows I can see it, so he's going to aim it at one of you instead because you can't. The Thren moved. They did not move on Wren. They had watched a barefoot human be right about the freight and the charges and the ledger and the killing line, right about every single thing she had said since she walked into the crown of the station, and when she said the pale rod was charging to kill one of them next, they believed her the way you believe the last true thing in a room full of lies. They moved on the high factor of the marrow court, both of them, fast and plated and certain, and Drael brought the silence lance around toward the nearer of them, and Wren saw the killing line reach out again, blind and straight and sure. And she said, flat and clear across the dome, "Left. It's aiming at the left one. Step right." The left Thren stepped right. The line passed through empty air. And then two court enforcers who had spent their lives serving a factor who had written their homeworld into his ledger, and their names onto his cleanup list, closed the last of the distance. And the crown of Halber Reach was briefly, precisely loud, and then it was quiet again. And high factor Surath Drael was on the daylit floor of his own node with the silence lance fallen from his hand, alive, breathing, disarmed. Staring up through the great clear dome at a ledger he had spent his life writing and never once been able to see. Wren had not fired the sidearm. She had not moved from her step to the left. She had told a blind room where the invisible weapon was pointing twice and let the room do the rest. And the cost of it, the gray adjutant folded dead over its instruments, the clean, markless corpse of a being whose only crime was carrying its master's tools, lay on the floor between her and the plinth in the pouring cold daylight, and she looked at it for a moment and did not look away. because a diver who has watched people die at the bottom of wrecks does not get to look away from the ones who die at her word. That one didn't have to, she said quietly, to no one to the room. He aimed at me. It went through to the gray one, that's on him and it's on me for stepping. I'll carry it. She lifted her eyes from the adjutant to the two Thren standing over their fallen factor. You've got a hull. You've got a factor who marked your world and your names. And you've got about a quarter of the settled galaxy hanging over that plinth with a claim on it, dated, and nobody who can read it but me. She held out her empty hand toward the ledger in the light. So here's the only question left in this room. What do you want to do with the fact that, for the first time in 4,000 years, someone can check? The Thren did not answer her question. Sarah's, coming at last out of the shadow of the vent into the daylight of the dome, understood that they could not, that they were enforcers, built and trained to serve a hierarchy, and that the hierarchy had just been shown to have written their world into a harvest ledger and their names onto a cleanup list, and that there was no clause in anything they had ever been taught for what a Thren did when the court itself turned out to be the wreck. So they did the only thing left to beings whose entire structure had fallen out from under them. One of them bent and took the fallen silence lance from the floor beside Drayle and looked at it for a long moment, the invisible weapon, the tidy thing, the tool of every quiet ending the court had ever arranged. And then it set the lance down on the plinth, deliberately, beside the seal writer, as if returning a thing that had never been theirs to hold. And then both enforcers turned and walked to the lift, and were gone, down and out toward the docks and a hull and a homeworld that now, for the rest of their lives, would hang over their sky with a claim on it they had seen a human read. They'll tell people, Sarah said. He had come up beside Wren without deciding to. Not many, not loudly, but they will not be able to stop themselves saying it once to someone they trust. That a human read the ledger, that there was a weapon in the room no one could see. He looked down at the gray adjutant, at the clean, markless death of it, and the physician in him catalogued the stopped hearts, and the physician in him grieved, distantly, for a being he had never met. You have started something that does not stop because you leave the room. Good, said Wren. She was looking up at the ledger. Sarah's followed her gaze to the empty air over the plinth and saw nothing, because there was nothing for him to see, and he watched her face while she read the thing he had spent his life beside and never once glimpsed, and he saw it change, saw the cold, flat diver's calm she had worn since the recovery cradle go still and stiff at the edges, saw something move behind her plain, remade eyes that was not calculation and was not fear. How much of it is there? He asked quietly. All of it. Wren's voice had gone low. It doesn't stop at 300 marks. That's just what's over this node. This node feeds, I can see the lines going out off the plinth into the spine off the station. It's a piece of something. Like standing in one compartment of a hull the size of a moon and realizing the compartment goes on past every wall. She turned her head slowly, tracking claim lines only she could follow. Systems I've never heard of, species I've never seen, all of it dated, all of it tiered, yield, resistance, harvest, deferred. 4,000 years of somebody deciding who gets to be owned, written in a light they made sure nobody could ever read, so nobody could ever say no. She was quiet a moment. My people are one small mark in the middle of a wall of them, 41 years, and we're not even the ones they're afraid of. We're just next on a very long list filed low, because they couldn't focus their cameras on where we're from. And now you can read all of it. Sarah said it and felt the size of it settle on him, the physician who had meant to make a keyhole and had instead made the first eye to look into a 4,000-year-old dark. One human, in one room, that is not Wren, that is not a thing you carry out in your head and hand to your people. It dies with you. One eye. One set of eyes in a galaxy of the blind, and the court will spend everything it has to close them. And when they are closed, the ledger is dark again, and it is as if you never. I know, Wren said. I worked that out on the stairs. She turned from the ledger and looked at him, and Sarah's felt the weight of the look before he understood it. One eye doesn't matter. One Eye's a story the Thren tell once and nobody believes. The court hunts down One Eye and burns it, and the room goes dark again, and in 41 years they come for my people anyway. Low resistance, deferred on schedule. She held his gaze. Unless there's a way to make more. The chamber was very quiet. The ice planet threw its hard white light up through the floor, and the ledger hung unread over the plinth. And Sarah's Valn understood, all at once and far too late, that every road out of the crown of the station led through the 4 slender hands he had used to build the thing standing in front of him. "No," he said. "You made these." Wren tapped her own temple beside the flare scar without heat. "You tuned them, you overshot the window and gave me all of it instead of a keyhole. You know how you did it. It's in your hands and your instruments and your head. You could do it again." She did not step toward him. She did not raise the sidearm. She stood barefoot on the daylit floor and set it flat and plain, a pressure reading, a depth. "You could do it 100 times, 1,000. You could put the underlight into every human who'd take it, and then it isn't One Eye the court can burn. It's a species that can read the ledger, and you can't harvest a world that's looking back at you. You do not understand what you are asking." Sarah's heard his own voice climb and could not stop it. The court does not merely keep a ledger. The court is built on the ledger, on the certainty that the marks hold because no one can see them to challenge them. Every treaty, every debt, every claim over every world, all of it rests on the blindness. Universal, ancient, total. It is the foundation everything settled stands on. And you want me to take the one species your surveys could not even bring into focus and hand it eyes and turn it loose on the foundation. His 4 hands had come up, open, pleading, a gesture he had not made since he was young. "That is not sight. That is a fire. You are not asking me to heal anyone. You are asking me to burn down the dark that 4,000 years of settled space agreed to live inside." "Yes," said Wren. Sarah stared at her. "That's exactly what I'm asking." She said it without cruelty and without triumph, the coldest and simplest thing he had ever heard said in that room. "You built a dark room, physician. Not you personally, your whole galaxy, all of you. 4 billion years of eyes that learned to throw the band away, and then 4,000 years of people who figured out that meant they could write whatever they wanted on the walls and nobody could read it. You built a dark room, and you filled it with a ledger of who to eat and when. And then you were so sure of the dark that you took the one animal you couldn't see clearly, the one that came up off a world your cameras couldn't focus on, and you opened its eyes so it could read for you. She let it sit. You didn't make a fire. You struck a match in a dark room. All I'm telling you is the room's full of things that were only ever safe in the dark. That's not my doing. That's just what's in here." Below them, far below in the docks, a hull cast off the 2 Thren, going home to a world with a claim on it. And far out past the ice planet, where Wren could not see and Sarah's could only fear, a node had gone anomalous on a court monitor. And somewhere a factor senior to Drayle was already being woken with the news that Halber Reach had stopped answering the way a node should. And the machinery of 4,000 years was beginning, slowly, to turn its blind attention toward the crown of a small station under a white planet, where a human stood reading its most secret hand. "They will come," Sarah said. It was not an argument anymore. It was a fact laid on the plinth between them beside the seal writer and the silence lance. "Whatever you decide, whatever I decide, the node has gone quiet. They will come to find out why, and they will find Drayle alive and raving about an eye, and they will seal this station down to the hull plates and no hull leaves after that. You have hours, perhaps not that. Then we shouldn't spend them standing here." Wren was already moving toward the lift, toward the docks, toward the one hull that might still be loose in a station about to close like a fist. She stopped at the lift and looked back at him, at the physician standing alone under the dome beside the man he had helped to ruin and the ledger he had helped to open. "You coming, physician? Your name's on the list too. Terminate on completion. You're a loose end whether you help me or not. The only choice you've actually got left is whether you go out as the man who built the eye or the man who built the first one, and then built the rest." Sarah's came with her. He told himself in the lift going down that it was because his name was on the list, that a supplier who has been marked surplus has no better option than the human who reads the marks. It was true, and it was not the reason, and he was a physician and did not lie to himself as easily as he lied to a room, so somewhere between the crown and the mid-levels he stopped pretending. He came because he had spent 30 years mastering his throat so that no patient would ever read his fear, and a flare-blind girl off a dead salvage hull had read it in under a minute, and then trusted him to walk her out of a wound she had opened on purpose. And he found that he would rather be the physician she thought he might become than the one he had been that morning on the recovery cradle. The lockdown started, Wren said. She was watching the lift doors or through them. I can see it coming, it's like a tide. The locks are engaging in a wave out from the node level by level, doors going hot and staying hot. It's rolling down through the station faster than the lift, but it started above us, so we're ahead of it for now. Barely. She glanced at him. How many ways to the docks? 3 main transit spines. The lockdown will take the spines first. They are the arteries. They seal first by design. Sarah's made himself think, made himself be useful, made himself the man who knew the turns. There is a service route, cargo handling. It runs under the concourse to the freight docks. It is slower and it is filthy, and the lockdown reaches it last because the court values cargo and does not like to strand it. If we are ahead of the wave, we can stay ahead of it in the service route. If we fall behind, it seals in front of us, and we are caught between hot doors with nowhere to go. Then we don't fall behind. Wren hit the contact for the cargo level, found it by the current first try. Tell me the turns. I'll watch the tide. They came out into the cargo under levels of Halber Reach, into a low gray world of moving belts and stacked containers and the heavy idle glow, to Wren of freight systems drinking power off the station spine, and they went fast, the physician calling turns from memory and the human calling the tide from the band, and for 400 meters it worked. Then Wren stopped, one hand out, and Sarah's stopped with her. Security, she said. Ahead, around the next stack. 3 of them big, and something about the way they're built, the current runs different in them, heavier through the limbs. Station enforcement, not court, but they've got the lockdown order. She was reading the shapes through the containers in the only light that would ever let anyone read a shape through a container. Green-scaled, broad, 2 carrying long weapons, braced, area denial. 1 at a console, he's the one working the lock ahead of us. He's sealing the route by hand, node by node, faster than the tide, getting ahead of us on purpose. Reptilian, harrower stock. Halber Reach hires them for enforcement because they are large and patient and do not ask questions. Sarah's felt the old cold return. 3 harrowers with braced weapons in a cargo choke. Wren, we cannot go through that, not with a stolen sidearm and my 4 empty hands. This is not a silence lance you can step out of the way of. This is a wall. No, Wren agreed. We can't go through it. She was quiet a moment, reading, and Sarah's watched her eyes track the current up, across, down, the way a diver reads a flooded compartment for the gap she can fit through when the door is jammed. But the one at the console is sealing the route with the station's own locks. He's using the lockdown against us, which means he's routing a lot of authority through that console. And a console that's carrying that much authority is carrying a lot of current. And a lot of current, she looked at Sarah's, and something in the plain, remade eyes had gone diver cold, is a lot of current. What are you going to do? The same thing I did on the concourse. Let the room do it. Wren crouched and found what she was looking for low against the bulkhead, a maintenance run, a fat cable of station power feeding the cargo locks, glowing to her like a lit vein under the deck plate. That console the harrower's working, it's downstream of this. Everything on this route is. If the current on this line spikes hard enough, every lock between here and the docks throws its safeties and cycles open at once, and the lockdown eats itself. And for about 10 seconds every hot door on this level goes cold and open before the safeties reset. She looked up at him. I need a surge. A big one right here, right now. I can see where to put it. I can't make it, that's you. Me. You've got a med kit on your belt. You've had it this whole time. I can see the charge in it, the cell for the cautery, the power pack for the field diagnostics. It's small, but it's dense, and it's charged high because medical gear always is. She held out her scarred hand. Give it to me. And tell me I'm right about which of these lines is the main and which is the return. Because if I'm wrong, I dump your cautery cell into a dead loop, and nothing happens, and the harrowers hear it, and we're done. Sarah's looked at the two cables she had exposed, and he could not see the current in either of them, and he understood that she was asking him to confirm a thing he was blind to stake both their lives on his knowledge of a station's wiring against her sight of it, and that this exactly, was the shape of the rest of his life if he chose the road she was offering. To know the turns while she watched the tide. To be the blind hand that the seeing eye still needed. The left is the main, he said. The right is the return. I would stake my practice on it. And then, because it was true and because she could see if it were not, I am staking rather more than that. Left it is. Wren took the medkit and did something to it with her scarred diver's fingers that Sarah's did not follow, and set it against the cable she could see was live, and looked up at him one last time. When it goes, we run. Not the way we came, forward through the choke, right past the harrowers, because they'll be blind and staggering, and the doors past them will be open for 10 seconds and then they won't. You call the turns. I'll call the tide. Ready? No, said Sarah's Vaughn honestly. Good answer. Wren closed her hand. Nobody sane is. The surge went into the line she alone could see, and it ran the way current runs when it is given a road, and every cargo lock between the choke and the docks threw its safeties at once. The harrower at the console reared back as his board went white and dead under his claws. The two braced enforcers swung toward the sound with their long weapons, into a corridor that had just, to their eyes, malfunctioned for no reason at all, and Wren and Sarah's came around the container stack, and through the choke in the 10 cold seconds while every hot door on the level hung open and blind, past 3 green-scaled enforcers grabbing at a lockdown that had turned to water in their hands, into the freight approach to the docks, running, the physician calling the turns and the human calling the tide. And behind them the safeties reset one by one, and the doors went hot again, and the choke sealed, with the harrowers on the wrong side of it. That bought us the docks, Wren said, not slowing. It didn't buy us a hull. And the tide's still coming. It'll reroute around what I did and catch up. How far? 200 meters. The freight docks open ahead. Sarah's ran, forearms tucked. 30 years of careful stillness burned away into a physician sprinting through the underbelly of a station behind a barefoot human. Wren, even if we reach a hull, even if we cast off, the node has been quiet for the better part of an hour. Whatever the court sends will already be inbound. We will come out from under this station into open sky, and there will be a court hull sitting on us before we have made way. He said it not to stop her. He had stopped trying to stop her somewhere above the mid-levels, but because she needed to see the whole wreck to swim it. You cannot step out of the way of a warship. No, Wren agreed, running. But I can see one coming a long way off in a band it doesn't know anyone can read, and it's going to be looking for us blind the way it does everything. Ahead, the freight docks opened out under a smaller dome, the ice planet's light pouring down cold and white on a row of berthed hulls. Come on, physician. Let's go find the ugliest, oldest, least watched ship on this dock, the kind nobody's marked. And let's see what a diver does with a whole sky she can finally read. The freight docks were emptying as the lockdown reached them, dockhands and hull crews streaming for the transit gates, and in the confusion no one looked twice at a physician and a small human moving the wrong way, deeper in, along the row of berthed ships. Wren read the hulls as she passed them the way she had once read wrecks, not by their paint but by their power, which were live, which were cold, which idled ready and which were shut down for the seals to be checked. Not that one, she said, passing a sleek old courier. It's marked, there's a claim tag on the hull, Court Leon, they'd track it the second it moved. Not that one either, it's cold, the drive's pulled. She kept moving. There. The old freighter at the end, the ugly one. It was ugly, a squat Kesset bulk hauler, scarred and patched, its hull a dull gray nobody had cleaned in a decade. No claim tag on it. Nobody's marked it because nobody wants it. Drives warm, idling, ready to move. Somebody kept it flyable and didn't love it. That's the one. A Kesset hauler, Sayers eyed it. Slow, unarmed, it will not outrun a quart cutter. I'm not going to outrun anything. I'm going to hide in plain sight in a band the cutter can't see. Wren was already at the freighter's lock, reading the mechanism, finding the current that fed it. It's got a med bay. I can see the power draw, isolated circuit, aft. A hauler this old, running long cargo hauls, they carry a med bay because there's no clinic between stars. She looked at Sayers. That's for you. That's where you build the rest of the eyes. But first we get it off the dock. Can you fly a Kesset hauler? I can fly anything with a manual override, which a hauler this old will have, because the Kesset do not trust automation any more than they trust anyone else. Sayers put one of his 4 hands on the hull, feeling the age of it. Getting it flight-worthy is not the problem. The dock is sealing. The berth clamps are on the lockdown. When the wave reaches this berth, the clamps go hard, and nothing short of a torch gets us loose. Then we're loading before the wave gets here. Wren opened the lock the current gave, the hatch cycled, and she was inside, moving forward through the hauler's cramped gray guts toward the flight deck by a map of power only she could see, Sayers behind her. The clamps. Where's the release? Dockside, not shipboard. On a hauler this old the berth holds the clamps, not the ship, a safety. So a drunk Kesset captain cannot tear his own dock apart casting off angry. Sayers dropped into the pilot's cradle, 4 hands finding old manual controls, waking a drive that grumbled up out of a decade of idle. Someone has to release the clamps from the dock console, and then run for the lock before the hull seals and casts off without them. Wren was already back at the hatch. Which console? Wren. Which console, physician? You fly. I'll pull the clamps and make the hatch. I can see how long I've got. I'll see the tide coming and I'll see the clamps let go. You can't see either, so it's me. She was in the hatchway, the ice planet's cold light behind her, and for a moment Sayers looked at the small, barefoot shape of her against the white glare and understood that she had done this arithmetic already on the stairs hours ago, the way she did all of it. Warm the drive. When the clamps drop, you'll feel the hull come free. Don't wait for me longer than you have to. If the tide catches me on the wrong side of the hatch, you go. You've got the med bay, and you've got what's in your head. That's enough to matter even if I don't make it back. I am not leaving a patient on a dock. I know, said Wren. That's why I told you to. And she was gone down the hull toward the dock console, a small figure running through a bright emptying dock with a lockdown rolling toward her like a tide. She found the clamp console 40 meters aft along the berth, and it was live, and she could see the 4 heavy currents running out of it into the 4 clamps that held the hauler to the dock. She could also see the tide now, close, the lockdown wave rolling down the dock berth by berth, hot doors slamming cold and staying hot, 3 berths away, too, the current in each clamp console going dark as the wave took it and froze it in place. 2 berths. She had until the wave reached this console. After that the clamps would freeze hard and the hauler would sit here until a quart cutter came down through the dome and took them both. She read the console. It was Kesset, blunt and physical, 4 heavy contacts for 4 clamps, and she put her scarred hands on them and threw them one after another. And in the band she watched the 4 heavy currents die as the clamps let go 1, 2, 3, and the 4th stuck. The 4th clamp stuck. Its current did not die. She threw the contact again and the current stayed, bright and stubborn, the clamp holding. Some old corroded fault in a hauler nobody had loved in a decade. And the tide was 1 berth away now. The wave coming. And 3 clamps were loose and 1 was not, and a hull cannot fly held by 1 corner. Wren did not panic. Panic was the thing that killed you when your air was low. She read the stuck clamps current back to its source fast, the way she'd trace a jammed valve to the line behind it, and she saw it. The contact was throwing, but the current was finding another path, a corroded bridge across the fault, the clamp powering itself off a leak. She could not throw it open from the console. But she could see, low against the dock plate, the same fat maintenance vein she'd used in the cargo choke, the station power feeding the whole berth, and she had no medkit now. She'd spent it in the choke. She had nothing to make a surge with. Except the stolen sidearm, charged to burn, its cell a small furious sun in her hand. She did not have time to weigh it. The tide was at the next berth. She jammed the sidearm's muzzle against the maintenance vein at the exact point the band showed her the stuck clamp drew its leak, and she fired the whole charge into the line, and the overload ran down the corroded bridge and found the stuck clamp and burned the fault open, and the fourth clamp's current died, and the hauler came free of the dock the instant before the lockdown tide reached the berth and froze everything it touched. The hull was loose, and Wren was 40 meters from a hatch on a ship that was already, gently, drifting off its berth, with a hot dead lockdown at her back and a tide between her and the way she'd come. She ran. She ran along the dock as the hauler drifted, reading the one path the frozen tide had left her, and the hatch was closing. Sarah's holding it as long as he dared, the hull swinging out, the gap widening, and she reached the edge of the berth as the ship pulled away, and there was a meter of open dark between the dock and the drifting hull and the ice planet's cold light pouring up through it, and she did not slow down. A diver does not slow down at the edge. She jumped and caught the lip of the closing hatch with her scarred diver's hands, and Sarah's 4 arms had her and hauled her in as the hatch sealed, and the old Kesset hauler swung its ugly patched hull away from Halber Reach and out under the great white curve of the planet, running dark, one small unmarked ship in a wide bright sky. "You waited," Wren said, on the deck of the hauler, breathing hard. "I am a poor listener," said Sarah's Vaughn, and got back into the pilot's cradle. "There is a quart cutter inbound, high and behind, coming down out of the dark past the planet's shoulder. I have it on the old sensors, barely. It will have us soon." What now? That a diver does with a whole sky she can read. Wren pulled herself up beside him, into the co-pilot's cradle, and looked out and up through the old freighter's scarred canopy at the bright sky and the white planet and the black beyond, and she found the cutter before the sensors did. A hard knot of drive current coming down past the planet's shoulder, running blind, sweeping for them in a spectrum it could see. And around it, off it, bleeding into the band, she saw the thing that no pilot of that cutter would ever see. The cone of its own sensors, laid out in the underlight like the beam of a lamp in fog, showing her exactly where it was looking and exactly where it was not. "It's sweeping," she said, "wide and blind the way it does everything. And I can see where it's looking." She put her scarred hand flat on the old manual controls beside Sarah's 4. "Fly where I tell you. Not away from it, that's what it expects, that's where it's sweeping. Into its shadow. Under the beam along the planet's edge, where its own hull blocks its own sight. It's been navigating that sky blind its whole life, and it never once had to think about the shadow it throws, because nobody could see it." Her voice was flat and cold and certain, the diver in the flooded dark who has finally found the gap. Slow and low and quiet, right under the one place it can't look. "Ready." "No," said Sarah's. "Good," said Wren. "Fly." Sarah's flew. He flew a squat Kesset hauler on manual override, 4 hands on old physical controls, blind to everything that mattered, and he did it on the word of a human in the cradle beside him who called the sky like a diver calling a descent, down a hand, hold, ease left, slower, the cutters looking high and right, we're under its chin now, hold this. He could not see the cutter's sensor cone. He could not see the shadow it threw. He could see, on the hauler's ancient screen, a hard, bright contact sliding down out of the dark past the ice planet's shoulder, close and getting closer, and every instinct he had built over 30 years of careful survival screamed to run from it, and he did not run from it, because the human said the running was where it would look. He flew toward the warship. Into its blind chin, under the one beam it could not turn on itself. "It's sweeping back this way," Wren said, low, even, wide arc coming across our track. "When I say cut the drive, all of it, go cold and dark and just drift. A hauler with a dead drive is a rock and it sweeps for a live one." She watched the cone of the cutter's sight swing across the dark toward them, a lamp in fog, and she read the edge of it coming. "Not yet, not yet." The cone swept nearer. Sarah's 4 hands hovered over the drive cutoff. "Now." He killed the drive. The hauler went cold and silent and dark, drifting under the white curve of the planet, and the cutter's sensor cone swept across the space where they were and found a rock, an old dead hull, one more piece of the debris that hung around every station in the settled galaxy, and it swept on, hunting for a live drive, running scared for open sky, and it did not find one, because the only live thing in that shadow was holding its breath in a band the cutter's crew had thrown away 4 billion years ago. They drifted, cold and blind and quiet, for 11 minutes, while a court cutter quartered the sky above them looking for a ship that was sitting still in its own shadow. Wren watched the cone sweep and slowly widen its search out, away, toward the open sky where a fleeing hauler should have been, and when it had gone far enough she said, "Now the drive. Low, just enough to fall the way the planet's already pulling us. It'll read as debris settling, nothing chasing anything." Sarah's brought the drive up to a whisper, and the hauler fell around the curve of the white planet, the way a rock would fall, unhurried, unremarkable, one more cold body in a bright sky, and the court cutter dwindled behind them, still hunting, up and away, until the planet's shoulder came between the hauler and the warship and cut it off, and there was nothing ahead but open dark and the long fall to jump distance. Neither of them spoke for a while. The old hauler ticked and settled around them. Wren sat in the co-pilot's cradle with her scarred hands loose in her lap, and her plain-remade eyes half shut, resting the optic nerve, seeing the drive and the hull and the whole warm net of the little ship laid over the little ship. And Sarah's flew them out into the dark on manual, blind, trusting the sky she had read. "You did not have to come back to the hatch," he said finally. "On the dock. You told me to leave you. You could have made that true. It would have been easier for you to make it true than to make that jump." "I don't leave a tool on the floor," Wren said, without opening her eyes. It was the second time she had said something like it, and Sarah's understood now that it was not a joke and not quite a philosophy, that it was the whole cold, hard center of her, the thing a diver learned at the bottom of wrecks where the ones who left tools on the floor did not come back up. "You're the med bay and what's in your head. You matter even if I don't. I told you that on the dock. I meant it about you. I never said it about me." She opened her eyes. "But I'm not in the habit of drowning to prove a point either. The jump was makeable. I made it. Don't build a hole feeling out of it, physician. Build the eyes." The med bay of the old Kesset hauler was a cramped gray box after the drive, and it had not been used in years, and it took Sarah's most of a day cycle to bring it up to something a physician could work in. Wren helped him where a diver could help, reading the power, finding the faults, telling him which circuits were live and which were leaking, and which had died so long ago the hauler had simply rooted around them. And while they worked, out past the scarred canopy, the ice planet fell away behind them, and Halber Reach dwindled to a bright point, and then to nothing. And the old hauler ran dark and slow toward the edge of the system, and the long cold dark between stars. On the first night out, Wren's sight failed. It came without warning. She was reading a leaking circuit for him, tracing the fault back along a line only she could see, and the line simply went out, the whole lit map of the ship, the drive and the hull and the warm net of it, guttering like a lamp starved of fuel, until there was nothing over the ordinary gray world but a smear of blue at the center of everything, the old smear, the flare smear, come back. She did not cry out. She put one scarred hand flat on the bulkhead and held still and said, in the flat, even voice a diver keeps when her air runs thin, "I can't see the band. It's gone. It just went." Sarah's had her in the med bay cradle before he had decided to move, 4 hands going to work, and he examined the eyes he had made with the instruments he had rebuilt and read what he found there and did not soften it, because she would see the softening on his throat. "The augment is drawing more than the tissue can feed it," he said. "You woke seeing the whole band because I overshot the window, and the whole band costs. Your eyes are running an engine built for a keyhole. It overheats. It browns out." He worked as he spoke. "It is not failing, Ren. It is tired. It will come back when it cools. But you cannot run it wide all the time the way you have since the recovery cradle. It will burn if you run it like that. You have been running it like that for 2 days without rest because there has been no hour in 2 days when it was safe to be blind." "There still isn't," Ren said. "There is now. I am here and the ship is dark and nothing is hunting us for a few days at least." Sarah sat back. "Close your eyes, let it cool. That is not me managing you. That is me telling you the truth about a thing I built and you cannot see the inside of. You read every gauge on this ship. Read mine. My throat says the eyes will hold if you rest them and burn if you do not. Is that a lie?" Ren was quiet a moment, reading him, the one thing she could still read with the band guttering, the slow, even flush of a man telling the truth. "No," she said. "It's not a lie." And she closed her eyes and rested them, and after a while the smear thinned and the warm net of the ship came back up out of the dark, dim at first and then steady, and she let out a breath she had been holding for 2 days. "There's a cost," she said. "It was not a complaint, it was a reading. You didn't mention that part back in the recovery suite. You said color with no name, you didn't say it burns." "I did not know it burned. I meant to give you a keyhole, and a keyhole would not have cost you anything. I gave you a door thrown open by accident, and the door costs." Sarah's began, carefully, to build a thing that would help, a shunt, a way to bleed the heat, cruder than a proper clinic could make but better than nothing. "The ones I make for your people will run narrower than yours, and so they will cost less and hold longer. You will always see the most and pay the most. You are the first, and the first was a mistake, and the mistake sees further than any of us will ever build on purpose again." He glanced at her. "You should know that you will carry more of it than the ones who come after. It seems the sort of thing you would want read plainly." "It is." Ren opened her eyes, the band steady again, the ship lit up around her, and looked at the physician building her a way to bear the thing he had given her. "Keep the narrow ones narrow. Don't overshoot again. One of me is enough. The rest of them should be able to see the mark over their sky without going blind reading a circuit on the second night." She almost smiled, and did not. "Somebody has to run wide, though. Somebody has to be the one who sees the whole band and pays for it. Might as well be the one who already got used to the dark." "It will not be the same as yours," Sarah said on the second day, hands deep in the medbay's fabricator, coaxing it toward a task it had never been built for. "What I made in you, I made across 19 days of preparation in a proper clinic with a proper node feeding me. Here I have a cargo fabricator and my 2 good hands and my memory. What I can make here will be cruder. It may give a narrower band. It may not hold. The first ones will be experiments, Ren, and the subjects will be—" He stopped. "Human," Ren said. "The subjects will be human, say it. You're building a thing to put in human eyes and you're afraid of what humans will do with it. You've been afraid of that since the recovery cradle. It's the loudest thing on your throat." She was sitting on the medbay's single berth, watching him work with her plain, remade eyes. "Go on. Ask the thing you keep not asking." Sarah's Valm kept his hands in the fabricator and did not look at her, because it did not matter whether he looked at her, because she could read his fear off his throat whether he faced her or not, and there was, he had discovered, a strange freedom in being unable to hide. "You will take this home," he said, "to your people. A crude, narrow, uncertain sight, made in a cargo bay by a physician of a species that filed yours as low resistance. And your people will open their eyes, a few at first and then more, and they will look up, and they will see the mark over their sky. Harvest, 41 years, a hand. And they will see, laid over 4,000 years of settled space, a ledger of every world that was ever quietly owned by beings who were only ever safe because no one could see them right." He drew his hands out of the fabricator. And then what? Ren, I have to ask it because I built the first eye and I will have built the rest. What does your species do when it can finally see the room the whole galaxy has been eating in? Ren was quiet for a moment. Out past the hull, the last of the system's light thinned toward the dark. I don't know, she said. That's the honest answer, and you'll see it's honest. I don't know what they'll do. She looked at him. But I know what they won't do. They won't keep writing in the dark. That was your galaxy's trick, physician, not ours. 4 billion years of eyes that threw the band away, and then 4,000 years of people who learned that meant they could own things in the dark and never be caught. That's not sight. That's the opposite of sight. That's a whole civilization agreeing not to look at what it's doing. Her voice stayed flat and cold and even. We came up off a world your cameras couldn't focus on, a world you filed as noise. And the thing about a species that evolved somewhere your instruments read as a smear, we didn't get to agree not to look. Nothing on our world let us look away and live. So no, I don't know what my people do with the ledger, but I know they'll do it with their eyes open. And I think that's the thing the court should actually be afraid of, not the seeing, the not looking away. The crossing to human space took 19 days, and Sarah's counted them, because 19 days was exactly the span he had once meant to spend teaching a blind girl to see one careful drop at a time, and he spent them instead in the belly of a stolen hauler, teaching himself to build sight in the dark. He worked the fabricator until his 4 hands ached. He failed, and the failures taught him, and Ren sat across from him through all of it, reading the machine, catching the faults he could not see, the two of them building the impossible thing between a physician's memory and a diver's eyes. You could stop, Ren said once, near the end of it on the 16th day, when a fabricated augment had failed on the bench in a way that clearly cost him. You know that. You could put me off at courting and fly this hauler somewhere the court never looks and live 30 quiet years. You don't owe my species anything. You filed us as noise, same as the rest of them. I did not file you as noise. Sarah's did not look up from the bench. I chose you off a charity roll because you were desperate and debt-marked, and I believed you would be grateful and controllable and blind in every way that mattered. That is worse than filing you as noise. Noise is a mistake. What I did to you was a plan. He set down his tools. I have opened 41 pairs of eyes in my life and told myself each time that I was a healer. You are the 42nd. You are the only one I ever opened in order to own. And you are the only one who ever woke seeing more than I meant to give. He looked at her at last. I am not building the rest of the eyes to pay a debt to your species, Ren. I would be lying and you would see it. I am building them because I spent 30 years mastering my throat so no one could ever read my fear, and it turned out the only thing worth doing with a life like that was to hand the sight to the people it was hidden from. Call it what you want. I do not have a clean word for it, but I am not going to stop. Ren looked at him for a long moment, at the flush on his throat, at the truth of it laid bare in a band he would never see, and she would always read. No, she said, you're not lying, and that was all. From Ren, Sarah's had learned it was a great deal. They came into courting on the 20th day. A human way station hung at the edge of a dim red system, patched and crowded and poor, the kind of place that took debt-marked salvage crews and asked no questions. And Ren brought the hauler in on a berth nobody watched and looked out through the scarred canopy at the first human faces she had seen since the flare took her sight, and did not weep, because she was not built to, but sat very still for a while with her plain, remade eyes open. The first other human to take the sight was a woman named Osai Bakar, 40 years old, a hull welder gone blind the same way Ren had a flare, a torn sail of radiation, a smear across the center of the world that grew until it ate everything. Courting had 100 like her. The frontier made them faster than it made anything else. Sarah's examined her eyes in the hauler's cramped med bay with instruments he had rebuilt from a cargo fabricator, and told her, gently, honestly, that what he could give her was crude and narrow and uncertain and might not hold, and that she would see the ordinary world again, but also another one, and that the other one was full of things the galaxy had spent 4,000 years making sure no one could see. "Will it hurt?" Osei asked. "Yes," said Sayras, who had learned from Ren that a physician who could be read did better to say the true thing. "And when it is done, you will see a mark over this station and over your home system and over human space entire. It says harvest. It has a date. I will not soften it." "You are not paying me to soften it. You are paying me to open your eyes." "Then open them," said Osei Bakar. She woke seeing, the way Ren had woken seeing, and the first thing she did was go quiet, and the second thing she did was look up, through the hull, through the station, at the great cold pale mark that hung over cording that no human eye had ever seen, held for transit value yield tier, refreshed on a cycle by factors who wrote it blind, and Sayras watched a second human being read the ledger, and understood that the thing he had done could not now be undone. That there were 2 eyes in the galaxy that were not blind, and soon there would be 4 and 8, and that the number did not stop. "It's real," Osei said. Her voice was steady. Frontier voices were. "It's really there, over all of us, the whole time." She looked at Ren. "How long have they known that we couldn't see it?" "Always," Ren said. "That's the point of it. That's the whole point of the dark room." She met the other woman's newly remade eyes. "You want the truth, Welder. We're not special. There's nothing about us that scares them except one thing. We come from a world their machines can't focus on, so they filed us low and never looked twice. And it turns out the one species they couldn't see clearly is the one you least want to hand a pair of working eyes." She almost smiled and did not, because she was not built for it. "Sayras builds the eyes. I read the ledger. And now there's 2 of us who can, and the number doesn't stop. That's the whole plan. That's all of it. We hand out sight until the dark room has too many people in it to be dark anymore." Word did not travel fast, because Ren would not let it travel fast in the way that got people killed. There was no broadcast, no manifesto, no fleet. That was the court's mistake to make, the loud one, the grand gesture, the mask dropped for the cameras. Ren had spent her life at the bottom of wrecks where the loud ones drowned, and she moved the way she had always moved. Quietly, procedurally, one careful drop at a time, exactly as a certain physician had once planned to teach her to see. She had learned the lesson better than he had taught it. The sight went out along the human frontier, the way water finds its level, welder to welder, crew to crew. The blind of 100 poor stations opening their eyes in cramped mid-bays, and looking up at a mark that had hung over them their whole lives, and going quiet, and then going to work. The court's first answer was not a fleet. It was quieter than that, and Ren caught it on a station called Leda Waypoint, 6 weeks out of courting, and it taught her exactly how the war was going to go. She was crossing the waypoint's low, crowded concourse toward the berth, Sayras a few steps behind her, when she saw the hunter. He was old, one of Sayras's own kind, four-armed and pale, dressed as a transit clerk, moving with the easy nothing of a man with nowhere to be, and in the ordinary spectrum he was invisible in the crowd, one more pale traveler among 1,000. In the band he was a lit beacon. He carried something at his chest, small and tight and charged, and it did not idle the way a weapon idled or draw the steady load of a scanner. It pulsed. Slow, patient, deliberate, a soft repeating flush of current, and it reached out into the underlight around him in a widening ring, and Ren watched it and understood what it was before she had a word for it. "Stop walking," she said low, not turning. "Don't look at him, the old by the transit board, the one dressed as a clerk. He's carrying a court tracer." Sayras stopped and did not look and kept his throat still by an act of will and said quietly, "A tracer reads a signature, a biometric, a hull code, a debt mark. It cannot read us, there is no signature to read, we are 2 travelers among thousands. It's not reading, it's asking." Ren watched the soft ring of current widen off the hunter's chest, wash across the crowd and come back. "It pulses out and it listens for something to answer, and I finally worked out what it wants an answer from because it just washed over me and I felt no. I saw, it's looking for eyes. Court eyes, keyed to the ledger, the kind you build." It pulses the underlight and a court-keyed augment answers back. A little flare, a handshake, because that's how the court would track its own assets. It never once imagined an eye that wasn't the court's. She was very still. Mine's not keyed to anything. You overshot the window. You built me wrong or right, depending on the day. So when his pulse washed over me, I answered with nothing. I'm dark to it. So are all the ones you've made since. Because you made them the same crude way you made me, in cargo bays, off no note at all. Then it cannot find us. Sarah's felt the cold ease off a fraction. It is hunting for a handshake we do not give. It can't find us by the tracer. No, Wren's flat voice did not warm. But he's Ol and you're Ol, and there are not many Ol on the human frontier, and he's standing between us and the only berth our hull is cleared for. He doesn't need the tracer to answer if he just recognizes your face. She began to move again, slow, angling away from the transit board, drawing Sarah's into the shelter of a cargo queue. The court sent an Ol to hunt an Ol because the court is nothing if not tidy. Tell me, would he know you? Sarah's did not answer for a moment, and the silence was answer enough, and Wren read the flush that came up his throat and understood before he said it. His name is said Iran, Sarah said very low. We trained in the same concordance. He went into court service and I went into the charity wards, and we did not part as friends because he thought me soft and I thought him a collaborator, and we were each, it turns out, exactly right. He drew his forearms in. If he sees my face, he will know it. And a tracer that comes home empty is a failure. A face is a success. He would take the face. Then he doesn't see your face. Wren was reading the concourse now fast, the whole lit map of it laid over the crowd, the exits, the charges, the soft, patient pulse of the tracer widening and returning, and the one thing the tracer's own light was doing that its carrier would never see. Here's what's going to happen. His tracer pulses on a cycle, slow, even, about 4 seconds. And every time it pulses, for about half a second it washes his own sight, his ordinary eyes, everyone's ordinary eyes with nothing because it works in the band. But it does something else. I can see it. When it pulses, the current draw spikes, and it pulls that spike off his own augment's power feed, and for that half second his court-keyed eye browns out. He goes half blind in the band on his own cycle, 4 seconds apart, and he has no idea, because to him nothing changes at all. She almost smiled and did not. The court built a hunter that blinds itself every 4 seconds and never told it, because the court has never once had to think about what its own instruments look like to someone who can see them. You are going to walk us past him, Sarah said. In the half second his own tracer blinds him. I'm going to walk us past him on the pulse, every pulse, 4 seconds at a time until we're at the berth. Wren timed it, watching the ring widen and return, widen and return. It's slow. It's going to feel wrong. You're going to want to hurry, and hurrying is what gets you seen. So you're going to move when I move and stop when I stop, and trust the tide, same as the docks, same as the cutter. He is looking for a handshake we don't give and a face he half remembers, and every 4 seconds he goes blind to the only light that could show him we're here, and he will never know it, because nobody ever taught the court to be afraid of the dark it made. She waited. The ring pulsed out. Now. They crossed the concourse of Leda Waypoint in slow half-second steps, on the pulse of a hunter's own self-blinding tracer, a physician and a barefoot human moving through the widening rings of a thing built to find them. And said Iran stood at the transit board in his clerk's clothes with the court's patience, and the court's certainty, and browned out, 4 seconds apart, to the one sight that would have shown him his quarry passing within 10 meters of his own hands. He pulsed and saw nothing, and pulsed and saw nothing, and by the time Wren and Sarah's reached the berth and the hull's lock cycled shut behind them, the tracer had washed the whole concourse 100 times and come home 100 times empty, and its carrier had recorded, in his tidy court report, that the maker of the eyes had not passed through Leda Waypoint. He'll do that on 100 stations, Wren said on the flight deck, watching the waypoint dwindle. The court will send tracers up and down the frontier, patient, tidy, sure, and every one of them will hunt for a handshake we don't give and blind itself on its own cycle and come home empty and file that we were never there. She sat back in the cradle. That's the whole war, physician, right there. They're going to spend 4,000 years of habit hunting us with instruments that can't see us, built by people who never had to imagine an eye they didn't make. And we're going to watch them do it in a light they threw away and step past them 4 seconds at a time. She closed her eyes, resting the optic nerve, seeing the drive through her own lids. They should have kept me keyhole blind. That was the only version of this where they win. The moment you gave me the whole band instead of the sliver, they lost, and it took them a year to start finding out. Sarah's flew them out toward the dark and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that she could not already see on his throat. That she was right, that he had done it, that the largest reversal in the history of the settled galaxy had turned on a physician who overshot a window by a hand's width and gave a blind girl too much of the light. The court felt it before it understood it, and Sarah's, who knew the court the way a man knows the house he grew up in, read the signs of its confusion in the few scraps of news that reached the frontier, and told Wren what they meant. A node on the Kesset rim went dark and would not refresh, and the factor sent to press the seal reported the marks disturbed, tampered, though no hand could have touched a thing no hand could see. A Thren enforcer, one of 2 who had come back from a station under a white planet, said a thing in a dockside bar on his homeworld that he should not have said and could not stop himself saying, that a human had read the ledger, that there had been a weapon in the room no one could see. And the thing traveled quietly, the way true things travel, from a bar to a barracks to a war council, until a species that had just learned its own world hung in a harvest ledger began, very slowly, to ask who else knew. They cannot find the leak, Sarah said. They were 3 months out of courting by then, and the hauler had a name now, and a crew of frontier humans with remade eyes, and a route that touched a different poor station every few weeks. That is the thing you have to understand about what you have done, Wren. The court is built to find a leak. Spies, documents, a stolen file, a traitor with a copy of the ledger that they know how to hunt. They have hunted such things for 4,000 years, but there is no file, there is no copy. There is no document to seize, and no traitor to silence. There is only a spreading number of eyes that see a thing that was always there, and you cannot seize a thing that was always there, and you cannot silence a truth that every marked being can simply look up and confirm for itself. He shook his head slowly. They are hunting for the hole in the dam, and there is no hole. The whole dam has gone transparent. And the marks, Wren said. She was at the canopy, resting the optic nerve, seeing the drive and the hull and the dark. The marks over the systems, they're still there, still dated, still saying harvest. Yes, and now they are the worst thing the court owns. Sarah's came up beside her. For 4,000 years the ledger was the court's greatest strength, every claim held because no one could challenge a mark they could not see. And now, Wren, think of it, every one of those marks is a confession, written in the court's own hand. Over every world it ever meant to take, the Thren can see the claim on their homeworld now. The Kesset can see the tier on their systems. And the Ol, my people, held in Leon 90 years, and I am the one who is telling them because you gave me the eyes to see it and the reason to say it out loud. His throat flushed, and he let it, because there was no longer anyone he wished to hide it from. The strongest thing the court ever built has become the largest pile of evidence in the history of the settled galaxy. And it cannot be unwritten, because it was never written anywhere but the one place they were all so sure no one would ever look. Wren was quiet for a while. Out past the hull, the frontier stars burned thin and cold. You know what the funny part is, she said, the part I keep coming back to. She did not sound like she found it funny. She sounded like a diver reading the last gauge. They didn't have to give us the eyes. Nobody made you do it. The court paid you for one asset, one controllable human, keyhole blind, dependent, owned. That was the whole plan, yours and theirs. A tool that could see just enough of the ledger to be useful and never enough to be dangerous. She turned from the canopy. the single most protected secret in 4,000 years of settled space. And the court's own factor decided the way to protect it better was to build a pair of eyes that could read it, because they were so sure of the dark. So sure nobody could ever really see, that the only risk they could imagine was one leak they could control. Her plain, remade eyes found his. You didn't lose the ledger to a war, physician. You didn't lose it to a fleet or a spy or a traitor. You lost it because you were so comfortable in the dark that you handed a lamp to the one animal you'd filed as too dim to hold it. That's the whole story. That's all of it. The galaxy went blind on purpose 4 billion years ago, and then got so used to the dark that it built the thing that would turn the lights on and paid for the privilege. The sight did not stay with the humans. That was the thing the court never predicted, because the court would never have done it, because the court could not imagine a species that would take the single most valuable advantage in the history of the settled galaxy and simply give it away. But Wren had seen the marks over the Thren homeworld and the Kesset systems and the Old Concordance, and she had done the cold arithmetic she did about everything. And the arithmetic said that one species with eyes was a thing the court could still, eventually, grind down. But a galaxy of marked peoples who could all see the marks was not a thing anyone could put back in the dark. So Sarah's built eyes for a Thren, the first non-human ever to take the augment, an enforcer who had set a silence lance down on a plinth and walked away and spent a year drinking and telling a true thing in bars until the humans found him and offered him the one thing that would make the true thing matter. And the Thren woke seeing and looked up at the claim over his own homeworld and did not drink after that. And then there were Kesset eyes and Ol eyes, and eyes among species Sarah's had to learn the biology of from scratch, each augment cruder and narrower than Wren's and each one enough. Each one another watcher in a room that had been dark for 4,000 years and was filling, now, with people who could finally see what had been written on the walls. You're arming the whole galaxy against your own people, a Kesset merchant said to Sarah's once, warily, on a poor red station at the edge of nowhere, the first of his kind to sit in the hauler's medbay. The Ol, the court, you're one of them. I am giving the whole galaxy its eyes, said Sarah's Valm. What it does with them is not mine to decide. That was the court's mistake, deciding in the dark for everyone forever. I am done deciding for people who cannot see. Open your eyes and decide for yourself. He set his 4 hands to the work. That is the only apology I have. It is a large one. Hold still. The court did the loud thing in the end, because that was the only kind of thing it knew how to do when it was afraid. It could not find the leak, so it decided to make an example. It could not seize a truth that every marked being could look up and confirm, so it reached for the one instrument it had always trusted, force, applied in the dark, where force had always worked, and it sent a squadron toward the human frontier, toward the poor red stations where the eyes were being made, to burn the maker and the first seer and as many of the newly sighted as could be caught, and to remind the settled galaxy, in fire, that the court's arrangements were not to be looked at. They came in blind. Of course they came in blind. They had always come in blind in 4,000 years, and it had always been enough, because the beings they came for were blind too. The squadron ran dark toward courting with its drives banked, and its approach masked, confident in the old certainty that no one could see it coming. And every welder and salvage diver and remade frontier human on 3 stations watched it come the way Wren had watched a court cutter quarter an empty sky, read its sensor cones laid out in the underlight like lamps in fog, read the banked drives and the masked hulls that hid nothing at all from an eye that saw the band, and read. On every ship in the squadron, the small type marks the court had written on its own crews: surplus, deferred, expendable, the same list, always the same list. The court could not stop making it. Nobody met the squadron with a fleet. Wren had been very clear about that, in her flat, cold diver's way. A frontier of poor stations does not win a battle against a court squadron, and a species that answers fire with fire in the dark has simply agreed to fight on the court's chosen ground. So the stations did not fight. They emptied quietly, early, days before the blind squadron arrived, because the seers had watched it leave its staging point and read its heading off the band and known where it was going before its own crews were told. And when the court squadron came down on courting in fire and fury to make its example, it found a poor red station stripped bare and dark and empty, not a soul aboard, nothing to burn but rock, and it hung there in the daylight of a dim red sun, having traveled a very long way to threaten an empty room, while every being it had come to terrify watched from 100 safe dark places, and read, on the squadron's own hulls, the court's confession that it had marked its own crews for disposal too. 2 of the squadron's own captains did not fly home. Sayras heard about it later, the way he heard about everything, in scraps that traveled the frontier. They had taken the augment from a human hand somewhere between the staging point and courting. The sight had reached even into the court's own service by then, welder to welder, crew to crew, the water finding its level, and they had looked up at the orders that hung over their own bridges, and read the small type mark the court had written on them, and declined to die for a ledger that had them filed as surplus. The court sent a squadron to make an example, and the example it made was of itself. Surath Drail did not fare well in the end, though Ren took no satisfaction from it, because she was not built for satisfaction any more than she was built for anger. The high factor of the Marrow Court had lost the single most protected secret in 4,000 years of settled space, in a room under a white planet, to a barefoot human he had filed as low resistance. And a court built on the certainty of the dark does not forgive the factor who lets the light in. Sayras heard that Drail had been recalled, and heard nothing of him after that, and understood the silence for what it was. The court could not unwrite the ledger. It could not seize a truth that was always there, but it could still, in the old way in the dark, tidy the one being who had held the seal writer when the eyes walked in. A man who had spent his life arranging quiet endings for the inconvenient received, at the last, the arrangement he had spent it perfecting. There was, Sayras thought, a kind of symmetry in it that a physician could recognize and take no pleasure in. Ren was on a station called Harns Deep the day she understood that it was over, not finished, never finished, but over in the way that mattered, the way a wreck is over when the water finally stops rising, and you know you are going to make the swim. She was 23 by then, a year past the flare and the blindness and the recovery cradle, and she stood at a wide port on the human frontier with a mug of something warm going cold in her scarred hands, resting the optic nerve, and she looked up through the great clear span of it at the mark that hung over the station. It was there, it was still there. It would always be there, because a mark written into the underlight did not fade because the marked could see it. It faded only if a factor came to refresh it, and no factor was coming to refresh the marks over human space anymore. Because the marks over human space had become a confession, the court could not afford to sign again. But the old mark still hung, cold and pale and patient, over Harns Deep and over the frontier and over all the poor bright stations where the blind were learning to see. Yield tier, low resistance, deferred harvest, and a date. 40 years now. It had been 41 when she read it in the crown of Halber Reach. A year had gone by. The countdown did not stop for being seen. In 40 years, the ledger said, the court would come to harvest a species it had filed as too dim to matter, off a world its cameras could not focus on, low resistance, deferred. Ren looked at the mark, and at the number in it, and did the cold arithmetic she did about everything. 40 years, she said. There was a young welder beside her, newly sighted, still flinching at the marks the way they all flinched at first, before the flinch turned into something steadier. He looked at her, and then up at the thing over the station, the thing he had learned only a week ago that he could see. That's what it says, 40 years, low resistance. She drank the cold mug down because a diver does not waste what she's carrying, and she set it aside. They filed us the day their machines came to look at where we're from and came back seeing noise. They wrote down the number that means harmless because it's the number you write when you can't see the thing, and then they built us the eyes. She was not smiling. She was never quite smiling. There's a whole galaxy of people who couldn't see the mark over their own sky, and now they can, and they got their eyes from us, because we were the first ones handed a lamp in the dark, and the first thing we did with it was pass it around. She looked at the young welder, at his new frightened seeing eyes. Low resistance. That's the last thing that ledger ever got right about us, and it was wrong when they wrote it. 40 years is a long time to leave a species alone, with a thing it can finally see. The welder looked up at the cold, pale mark, 40 years and counting, and then at the small, scarred woman beside him who had walked into the dark room and turned on the lights. "What do we do," he said, "in 40 years when they come?" Wren watched the mark hang over the station in the hard, bright frontier daylight. The mark the whole galaxy could see now, the confession no one could unwrite, the countdown running over a species that had been blind a year ago and was not blind anymore. "We'll see them coming," she said. "That's the whole difference. That's all it ever was." She turned from the port and left the mark hanging there over a station full of people learning to look up. They spent 4,000 years making sure nobody could watch them work, and they gave the eyes to us. Now everybody's watching. Let them come in 40 years and find a sky full of people who can see them the whole way down. She walked back into the bright and crowded deep of the station, one small, ordinary woman with her eyes open, and did not look back at the mark again, because she had already read it, and a diver does not stare at a gauge once she knows where the needle wants to go. Behind her, over a poor bright station at the edge of human space, the cold pale confession hung in a light that 10,000 people could suddenly see, and not one of them looked away.